A full moon is shown in the sky above the castle. A man was visible in the window, lying his head on the table. The man asked what to do. The people would soon begin to starve, and the Duke didn't care. He was doing nothing to prevent it. Something burning flew past the window. The man looked out the window with alarm. He peered out. The people below were fighting. His mouth opened in shock. The man exclaimed, "Is that really the Imperial Army?" He pictured a man wearing a crown. With a shocked expression on his face, he said it was Emperor Zarin. Burning cannonballs were flying toward the castle. The man saw a man on the roof. Leaning out the window, he called out to the Duke. A warrior with a sword stood on the roof. Hearing the request to flee from there, one of the projectiles hit the roof directly. The second flew toward the window with the terrified man. Flames erupted around them. With his mouth wide open, the burning man called out to the Duke. That's how the land of Bran fell. A useless patch of land on the edge of the Empire. The boy jumped up in bed. He clutched his chest, breathing heavily. He, the local Duke's butler, had perished with him. The boy looked in surprise at the mirror, thinking more accurately that he should have died. Touching his face, the man in the boy's body said he couldn't believe he had become a duke. He had been reborn 20 years before their deaths. The boy sat clutching his head. A whole day had passed since he had been reborn into the body of Duke Aaron. In a broken state and utter confusion, he hadn't eaten or drunk and hadn't spoken to anyone. Flexing his fingers, Aaron screamed like a man. He spent the second day furiously cursing the Emperor who had killed him and all the inhabitants of Bran, falling asleep and waking up delirious, pondering how to take revenge. Aaron touched the mirror with his palm. On the third day, he finally calmed down and realized he had a second chance to make things right. His fingers touched a document on the table, and he had to bury himself in a book to learn everything about the Duke. Early in his life, he had decided to prevent the impending horror, and after a couple of days, endless hunger forced him to stop. His fingers clutched a loaf of bread. Holding it in his hand, Aaron reflected that while he had spent his entire life helping the poor, who couldn't even afford a piece of bread, the Duke had never cared for anyone but himself, as if they weren't his subjects. Cheryl, Aaron's younger sister and a former imperial princess, pointed and exclaimed, "Why is he doing this?" She had spent so much time dragging him out of the room so he wouldn't starve there, and he hadn't. Looking at her fearfully, the boy apologized, saying it would be easier to chew the bread this way. With a slight tilt of his head, Aaron asked if she was free today and suggested they go somewhere. His sister frowned, asking where. The guys were standing in the dungeon. Rommel, the knight captain and unofficial swordsman, scratched his neck and said he'd ordered him to handle their food supplies, so why had he called them here in full armor? Aaron's mouth dropped open and he said Emperor Zarin was planning to destroy them. The guys looked at him in surprise. Cheryl's eyes widened and she said that their uncle, the Emperor, had sworn an oath to their father. Why would they break it? Aaron, wearing armor, explained that he was probably afraid they would use their right to the throne. And besides, he'd been personally informed of his plans to break his promise. Looking forward, the boy declared it was time to use the dragon's blessing. Glancing sideways at the man, his sister remarked that he'd wanted to keep him hidden until the very end. Aaron crossed his arms and replied that he hadn't been concerned about the Emperor's betrayal until recently. The girl pointed her flower-shaped staff forward and thought it was very strange. Her brother never talked nonsense. A portal to the mountains opened before them. Rommel exclaimed in shock. Turning around, Cheryl asked slightly. He didn't know for sure. She hadn't told him. She was an unofficial mage. The guys stood at a cliff in the frozen lands. Stretch her arms. The girl asked not to judge harshly. She hadn't practiced for a long time. Cheryl raised her staff. A fireball flew forward. The mage moved the staff in a circle. The fire moved. Eventually, several fireballs were arranged in a circle before her. Rommel, her mouth open in shock, said that it was in fact a ring of inferno. With a wave of her hand, the girl sent the fireball forward. The fire obscured the mountain top. It was destroyed. The knight's mouth fell open in utter shock. Cheryl, with a fire in her palm, said indifferently that it was weak, just above the seventh circle. She was an unofficial seventh circle mage. Looking at her in surprise, the knight asked, "So, she's a seventh circle mage?" The girl replied, "Yes, but that wasn't enough to defeat the entire Imperial army." Touching his chin, Aaron confirmed that it wasn't enough. They still had a long time to gain strength, and he thought to himself that the Duke's diary stated that she was a fifth circle mage, but in reality, she was an archmage. The girl waved her staff, saying that compared to her brother, all these things were mere toys. The knight turned to him in shock and asked, "Is that true?" The Duke drew his sword and said he'd find out now, and thought he'd try. He pulled out a page from the diary yesterday and thought about judging it. Touching his face thoughtfully, he explained that thanks to the dragon's blessing, his sister had become a fifth circle mage, and the Duke himself a grandmaster warrior. Clenching and unclenching his fingers, Aaron said that he too possessed that power. He walked over to the bookcase and took one of the books from it. Looking at the brown cover, Fundamentals of Imperial Swordsmanship, he thought. That's it. He couldn't become the best swordsman in the world right away. He'd start from the basics. Aaron raised his sword and stepped forward. Lightning appeared around the blade. Furrowing his brows, the boy shouted that this was the third version of the great sword art. Channeling energy forward, he unleashed piercing wind. A blue beam flew forward. It split the mountain in half. Dust rose from the destruction. Aaron put his sword away with a smile and thought he'd been aiming for the wrong mountain. But this would do. Rommel, very shocked. His mouth dropped open. A dragon flew in the sky. It turned its attention to the city below. It sniffed the air and thought unbelievably that here remained a trace of the blessing it had left generations ago. The dragon spun in the air and plummeted in flight. It transformed into a bird. A human foot touched the ground. A man held a fan, saying it was an excellent vessel. He stood in the forest not far from the castle. Fanning himself, he said it was time to meet the people he had blessed. The brother and sister looked ahead resolutely. A boy stood by a bookshelf holding Duke diary. A few days before he decided to become a duke, he opened the handwritten book. The man towered over the king lying in bed. Several years ago, with the help of a feudal lord, his father's brother, Uncle Zarin, had taken the throne from his weakened old father. He imagined a man in a crown and departing travelers, thinking that his father had died soon after, so he and Cheryl had fled the persecution of the authorities. The reason they had survived was because of the single condition his father had set for his brother to protect them. Imagining the coat of arms, he remembered that the children would never lay claim to the throne for the rest of their lives. And for that reason, he must allow Aaron to become Duke of the land of Bran on the edge of the empire. The monsters rushed forward. Bran was a useless land with a decrepit fortress. Naturally, nothing grew on it, and it was constantly attacked by monsters. Babies lay in cradles. Thanks to the dragon's blessing, he and Cheryl wielded the powers of a grandmaster. The guys stood on the wall. They had the power to restore life in this land. However, the Duke looked ahead, thinking that he had decided to hide his abilities for the rest of his life. Aaron held the diary, thinking it was to keep the promise he made to his father. He slammed the book shut and wondered if any promise was more valuable than the lives of his subjects. Currently, in the fortress of Bran, the boy winced in pain. The swelling on his wrist was surrounded by light. He moved his hand. Then, surprised, he exclaimed that it didn't hurt. A fair-haired girl pointed and asked him to play carefully, lest his parents worry. It was Cecilia, the saint of the Vivian order. Folding his hands in front of him, the boy agreed. Patting his head, the saint praised him. She turned, hearing the order for everyone to appear in the square. The Duke would give a speech. Aaron stood on a stone in front of the crowd. A man crossed his arms and asked what he wanted from them. Another asked. Who knows? He might say some more nonsense, maybe even introduce taxes. A mustachioed man in a hood asked if they had heard how the Duke had changed recently. Some of the people were beaten. Aaron said he'd heard about it. He'd found all the knights who had taken money from the people and punished them. Aaron crossed his arms, thinking he wasn't surprised by the crowd's reaction. They knew nothing yet because the Duke hadn't fulfilled his duties at all. He waved his hand. Standing on the dais, the boy declared that intelligence had reported that the orcs' numbers had increased sharply, and they were trying to take their lands. If they surrounded the castle, the people would no longer be able to obtain food. They couldn't sit idly by and wait for death. A man standing in the crowd said the orcs had been doing this for years. Another asked if he just heard about it, and a third said he thought it was something serious. Touching his chest, Aaron exclaimed, Are they really going to remain victims of these green skins? Or are they going to come with him to fight for their lives? The crowd stared at him in surprise, wondering where he'd gotten this from. The boy shouted that he was Duke Aaron, their lord and master of the Bran lands, issuing a new decree. A cry echoed through the small settlement, declaring that they would no longer sit in a stubborn defense against the orcs. They were now invaders. The men exchanged surprised glances. Imagining the monster by the sacks, Aaron exclaimed, How much longer will they endure the orcs' oppression? How much longer will they watch them live richer than them? The crowd was outraged. Aaron smirked. Raising his fist, he affirmed, saying they were going to overthrow the orcs, and everyone would become rich. The people's fists rose to greedy chances. A man in a white cloak stood among the others. Looking at the young man in the crowd, he wondered if he had received his blessing. A smile appeared on the dragon's lips, and he said he didn't want to stay long, but he had potential. A scroll appeared in his hand. Words could be heard from the room with the books, saying he had ordered everything to be bought yesterday. Aaron and the bearded old man were arguing angrily. Their conversation could be heard. Why hadn't he even bought 100 suits of armor? The young man replied. What if the expedition fails? He then heard the old man say. What if he takes responsibility then? The guys glared at each other. There was a knock on the black door. The disputants turned angrily, shouting at each other to enter and leave. As the door opened, Rommel appeared and announced that a man from Duke Raynon's recommendation had come to see him. The guys stared at him in surprise. The man, scroll in hand, bowed in greeting and said his name was Kindness and that he had come on Duke Raynon's recommendation. Taking the scroll, Aaron asked again on his personal recommendation and mentally recalled Kindness, thinking he had introduced himself as a strategist, but had left them a year later. His appearance was hard to forget. The boy unfolded the paper. He carefully read that 3 years had passed since he settled in the lands of Bran. On the parchment were black lines stating that there wasn't a day when he wasn't painfully reminded of his constant struggle to survive in this hell. This time he sent him a promising strategist, and some gold for the treasury. He hoped Kindness would serve him well these 3 years and that they would meet again someday. Holding the scroll, Aaron mused that Duke Rhainon had been loyal to the late emperor. Then his eyes widened with realization. Returning to the man, he asked for a little gold. The old man's eyes lit up with greed. Kindness laughed, saying he had sent 50,000 gold. The old advisor was saddened, saying it was understandable. The Duke was also going through hard times. Looking at him, Aaron ordered him not to complain. The money could buy enough equipment, and use the rest to cleanse the city. The man, surprised, asked again, "Cleanse the city?" Raising a finger, Aaron argued that investing for the future meant keeping gold in the treasury was imperceptible. It was better to invest it. If they didn't clean up the cities, frequent outbreaks of disease would occur, and then they would lose their most important resource, people. The fewer people they had, the more difficult it would be to distribute their forces, ultimately leading to the collapse of the castle. The dragon covered his face with a fan, thinking that his logic wasn't entirely sound. But more importantly, his train of thought was on the right track. Few people thought so far ahead, even fewer remembered hygiene. Perhaps he would be suitable as the caretaker of his nest. As he left the room, the old man grumpily told them to do whatever they wanted, and he resigned. The doors slammed. Aaron looked at Kindness and thought this was a strategist from Duke Rhainon on himself. He was just about to memorize strategy textbooks when he appeared just in time. Touching his chin, Aaron said that although the Duke had recommended him, he should understand that he couldn't immediately appoint him as chief strategist, as that could cause many of his subjects to rebel. The man nodded, confirming his point. Looking at him, Aaron continued that he would therefore be glad if he could demonstrate his skills in the upcoming campaign against the orcs. Shielding his face with a fan, Kindness said he would assist him in the upcoming campaign and thought how a pathetic man could doubt him. That was interesting. Aaron smiled, saying he relied on him and thought that if all went well, he would work with this man for the next 3 years. Kindness fanned himself, thinking that the better he got to know this man, the more fascinating he would become. And he promised out loud that he wouldn't let him down. Bowing his head, the boy remembered that his goal after the war with the orcs was to develop the dungeons. The guy was surprised. Aaron stood before a group of warriors a week later. Putting his hand on his hip, he said he hoped everyone had memorized their strategy by now. Did anyone need to explain it all over again? The soldiers remained silent. Looking at them, the boy resolutely exclaimed that they were leaving then. Pointing his sword forward, he shouted that today they would destroy the orc lair and become rich. Spears rose. The gates opened. Aaron rode ahead of the others on horseback. The guys stood at a cliff in the Black Forest. Aaron looked down, thinking that Kurok was the chieftain of an orc tribe who had captured a citadel and made a nest there. He imagined monsters attacking people and thought that because of them, their food supply lines had been destroyed. And a few years later, it was precisely because of them that a mass famine began. The boy clenched his fist, thinking that the problem needed to be nipped in the bud, and that's what he would do. Rommel, standing behind him, hit himself in the chest and said that they had found the cobalt archers. Without turning around, the boy asked how many. Looking at him, the knight replied, 5 groups, each with 5 or 6 monsters. Aaron turned and called Cheryl. His sister peeked out of the tent. Aaron drew a circle in the air with his finger. With a disgruntled sigh, the girl said she was already on her way. The girl, holding a staff, walked through the forest. A fireball soared upward. A face was visible on the fireball of the 3rd circle. Rays of light emanated from the staff. Cheryl said that this was the 3rd circle spell which hits like the 5th. Flames flew forward. The monster with the club stood in front of the others. The kobolds looked up. A fireball surrounded them. The monsters engulfed in flames screamed. The guys watched the smoke rise. Touching his head sadly, Aaron asked what the third circle was that hit like the fifth. He had asked them not to use magic stronger than the third circle so as not to attract the Emperor's attention. The offended sister stuck her tongue out at him. Aaron covered his face with his hand, thinking that if he'd known she'd use anything other than the piercing wind, he wouldn't have taken her today. Ines waved his fan and said he'd find out sooner or later, especially since the soldiers didn't spread rumors. There shouldn't be any problems. Closing his eyes, the Duke agreed and asked, "Have they found the right place?" The man confirmed with a confident expression. The day before the campaign began, Kynes fanned himself and said the best outcome of the war against the monsters was to destroy them before the real war began. They had little choice, and now the best strategy was to draw the enemy to a convenient location and destroy them there. The young man sitting at the table asked again, and was told this was necessary to avoid heavy losses. He introduced armored warriors, saying that the orc tribe numbered about 2,000, and even if they won, the losses would be incomparable. They only had 500 warriors. The sister and the knight nodded. Looking at them, Kynes continued that besides everything else, since they were attacking, every move needed to be carefully considered. He pictured the orcs catching up to the knight, and advised luring them out first with cavalry. He turned with a smile to Aaron who asked, "Should they use 100 cavalrymen as bait?" Pictured goblins stricken with arrows. The dragon explained that this would give them speed. They would set an ambush as soon as the orcs approached the forest. Archers and marksmen should destroy at least half the enemy force. He pictured knights with shields surrounding the monsters and continued. Then they would push them into open ground and surround them with heavily armed knights until they surrendered. Closing one eye, the boy said that was excellent. Then he looked ahead and said that they would proceed according to Kynes' plan. The monsters lay in the burning forest. The goblins approached the body. Then they ran off to the side. A rider standing by the cliff heard what appeared to be their movement. Behind them was Kynes, who said that these seemed to be unusual orcs. Since they had scouts, they would quickly prepare for battle as soon as they sensed trouble. Smiling, the man asked, "If that was the case, why not make the advanced orcs their slaves?" Aaron turned to him. Shielding his face with a fan, the man said he thought such a workforce would help his goal of developing the dungeons. Aaron was struck by the idea. Looking at the advisor, he said the idea was good. But would monsters really help a human? He'd heard that monsters only listened to dragons' orders. The dragon in the human's body laughed, saying no. Orcs were a species that obeyed only superior force, so being a dragon wasn't necessary. Turning away, the boy said he'd deal with it later. He didn't want his greed to lead to more casualties. The advisor nodded. Standing in front of the forest, the boy asked, "Is it time to begin?" Turning to Cheryl, he ordered 200 soldiers to take positions in the forest, while Rama was to form an iron ring and ambush. Turning the other way, he asked Kynes to remain at the top of the hill. The man with the fan nodded in agreement. Aaron extended his sword. Then he pointed them forward with a war cry. The orc leader sat on his throne, eating meat. A monster approached him and announced that the humans were attacking. The leader spat out a piece. Kurak, radiating a sinister aura, asked where it was coming from. An orc with sharp fangs replied. From the black forest, a shadow fell across the leader's face, who said that the insects hiding behind the stone walls had finally emerged, already dead. Raising his hand with a club, the monster roared that the meat was coming to them, that they would kill all the humans and capture their castle. The crowd of warriors at the castle roared in response. The leader's eyes blazed and he ordered the release of the Minotaur. One of the orcs tugged at the chain. A huge bull with an axe was in the cage. He raised his ringed nose and roared. Kurak swung his club and called for killing and plunder. His subordinates raised their weapons in response. The sinister army of monsters advanced. The sun was visible from behind the hills. A bird flew across the sky. The orcs ran quickly. The bird watched them from above. The monsters reflected in its eye. Between the man's palms was a magic ball, standing at the edge of the cliff. Kynes mentally told the man that the time had come. The army was moving forward. Drawing his sword, Aaron ordered them to prepare for clash. He raised his weapon. Swinging it, he shouted forward. The horse galloped quickly. An orc ran towards them. The two armies were almost at each other. The knights heard the order to attack. The orcs opened their mouths and roared. Sparks of battle rose up. Aaron and 100 cavalry against Kurak and 2,000 orcs. Aaron swung his sword. Drops of blood appeared. The armies clashed. Looking at the orc, the boy thought that it wasn't enough. He needed to press them further, and then he noticed something ahead. An axe was descending. It flew at Aaron's head. The huge minotaur raised its jaws and screamed. Aaron and his soldiers covered their ears. Turning, the boy shouted to not be afraid and to keep moving. The knights exchanged glances. Aaron charged forward, shouting. A green monster stood before him. Aaron raised his sword. He remembered his advisor's words about manpower helping the dungeons develop. He swung his sword sharply downwards. The blow landed flat. Looking at the approaching monsters, he thought they had driven them into the black forest. Turning, the Duke ordered a retreat as there were too many enemies. The orcs looked at him in surprise. The human army turned, growling and shouting that the humans were running away. They must follow. Together with the Minotaur, they gave chase. The humans led the orcs out of the forest. A man galloping behind them told the Lord that they were being pursued. Turning to the red-haired woman, he shouted that he would deal with them and tell them to retreat to the hill. He galloped back, thinking he had no intention of losing them. He looked determined. The Minotaur raised its arm to attack, and Aaron continued his thought, not a single one of his own. The knight turned to face the monster's fists, and Aaron continued. A soldier. He struck the bull with his sword. The monster was thrown back, and its carcass fell to the ground. The knight, watching this, let out a delighted sound. Putting his foot on the monster's body, Aaron thought she told him to go up the hill. But at least he wouldn't have to drag it himself. He asked Arthur to tie up this monster and throw it further into the bushes. The man with the mustache looked surprised, asking, Will he kill him? Looking at him, the boy replied, No, he'll need him later. Alarmed, the man agreed. The knight pointed and said that the orcs were advancing. The monsters were approaching and one of them said, Here are the humans, while the other suggested killing them all. Light fell on their faces. They looked up, looking at the fireballs. A powerful explosion sounded. Turning around, Aaron wondered what Cheryl was doing. Why kill all the orcs? He ordered a retreat. Kurok watched him. Frowning, he ordered them to catch up. They would avenge all their brothers. The knights galloped toward the sunset. The orc ran after them. Suddenly, something hit him in the temple. He tumbled backwards. A row of shields formed in front of the orcs. Human knights held them. The green monsters growled at this. The shields formed a wall. Aaron walked proudly past them. Looking down, he said that Kurok and all his kin were surrounded. He was giving everyone a chance to survive. A duel between the two leaders would take place, and the losing race would become slaves. Frowning, the green monster said that the orc didn't trust the human and thought that if he wanted, all his orcs would be killed. Humans couldn't be trusted. Looking down, the boy promised to swear on his warrior's honor, and he would do the same. Looking at him, the orc chieftain said that a human had no honor. Aaron frowned and ordered them to lock shields. The knights did so. Raising his club, Kurok agreed and asked him to keep his promise. The opponents stood facing each other. The monster took off abruptly. Swinging his club, he wished for death. The club struck the ground. Aaron stood unharmed in the dispersing dust. Steam billowed from the orc's mouth. Aaron dodged the club, watching his opponent. He thought this was what the dragon's blessing felt like. He hadn't yet fully mastered his body, but it seemed to react to the orc's attacks. Looking at him darkly, the monster called him a coward. Aaron grew angry. The blade sank into the ground. Angrily cracking his knuckles, Aaron said he would teach him manners. A frightened Rommel screamed, asking why he threw down his sword. Flexing his fists, the Duke asked him not to worry. He'd teach him a good lesson. Kurok tossed aside his club, saying that a man has honor, and then he too would throw down his weapon. He would break a man with his own hands. Rommel watched him approach the Lord, thinking that no matter how strong a man without a weapon was, anyone would lose to an orc. His paw reached for his fist. The man thought that orcs grew in battle their entire lives. They were stronger than most humans. Even their claws had become sharper, especially since the Duke wasn't even wearing gloves. The monster flew forward rapidly. Aaron watched the paw approach, his gaze intent. He watched the green hand move and wondered why it moved so slowly. He was concentrating slightly. Turning, the boy wondered what kind of blow he'd strike. The orc clenched his fist and swung, attacking the boy, thinking he'd test him. Aaron dodged the attack. A fist lightly grazed his cheek. The Duke slid back, touching the scratches. He thought he knew it would happen. It barely hurt. One of the warriors behind the shield asked if the Lord was really being defeated and what would happen to them if he really lost. Kurok beat his chest, shouting that he would make all the humans slaves. He stood in front of the boy and growled. Aaron held up a finger and ordered him to be quiet. The orc tensed, jumping up. Aaron extended his hand, saying that today was their time. He slapped the orc across the face with his palm. He fell to the ground. The monster shook his head. Jumping to his feet, Kurok asked if the human was using magic, and where was his honor. He was surprised when Aaron approached, saying that they would become slaves. The boy attacked again, finishing with their slaves. The orc leader flew back. He flew towards the knights, who ordered their shields to be raised. The barriers became a wall. The orc bounced off the shields and flew toward Eren. Eren caught the orc's head in his hands, smashing it between his palms like a sword. The orc's eyes closed, and he begged for mercy. Eren slammed him hard into the ground. The battered chieftain lay in the rising dust. The handprint remained on the ground near his head. The orc's enslavement was complete. Eren held the bound orc's rope. He stood on the wall with him, coughing into his fist. He addressed the orcs, saying that he did not intend to kill them yet, but from now on, they would become slaves to humans. The monsters looked stunned. Looking down, the boy continued that they would now work on Bran's lands. In exchange, he would grant them the right to hunt in the nearby forests. If their tasks were completed, they would share their food with him. However, if even one orc tried to rebel, he would kill them all and personally break the neck of anyone standing there. The orcs also looked at him silently. A vein bulged on the boy's face. He grabbed Kurok by the hair and shouted that if they remained silent, he would do to them the same as he had done to him. The monsters lined up in a chorus, agreed that everything was understood. Eren smiled, saying that in exchange for his wasted time and punishment for their misdeeds, they would take food from their reserves for themselves. The warriors rode into the fortress. The people rejoiced, praising the Duke. The soldiers returned victorious. They had defeated the orcs. Eren waved his hand. Looking at the knight, he asked him to bring the orcs. The prisoners emerged from the portal. Eren raised his sword using great swordsmanship and piercing wind. Waves of energy scattered everywhere. The bound orc trembled, thinking of this power. Turning to the captives, Eren declared that the orcs would serve the dragon's great power. They pressed their foreheads to the ground and heard the command to raise their heads. Pointing his sword, Eren told them to remember what he had single-handedly done to this city and to remember their place in this world. The next day, Kurok knelt, declaring that his brothers swore not to reveal his power. If they tried to take revenge, he would stop them. Looking down, the red-haired one asked them to remember that if any single orc did anything, he would exterminate their entire species. Kainos approached Eren saying that he had truly subjugated the orc. That was commendable. Spreading his arms, the boy said that they seemed to have mistaken him for a dragon. That made the task easier. The man laughed, hiding his face behind his fan, and asked again. Looking ahead, he asked. He knows dragons never forgive those who pretend to be one of them, right? The boy waved his hand and asked them not to misunderstand. He hadn't even mentioned the dragon. It seemed they made that up themselves. He'd simply decided not to disturb their flights of fancy. The dragon laughed, saying they were simply afraid of its power. Eren imagined the Duke from his past life and thought that this power was comparable to that of a dragon. Kainos was surprised by this reaction. Eren's daily glance indicated that he could tell the others about the orcs. In about an hour, he would call another meeting. The man nodded, putting his hand on his hip. Eren thought that Duke Eren with such power could protect his lands and subjects, and even if he couldn't, he owed it to himself to at least try. Was his promise to the former king really that important? Snapping his fingers until he shuddered. Eren thought he still had no intention of keeping those promises. His primary duty was to protect his subjects just as nobles did. He imagined the man in the crown, thinking he would definitely prepare for the battle that would decide everything. Eren sat at the table at the duchy's post-war meeting, explaining that they had successfully completed the military campaign against the orcs without a single loss. All thanks to the strategist Kainos. Cheryl took offense, pursing her lips. The man bowed, saying he was pleased to hear praise. Without him, none of this would have happened. Slamming her palms on the table, the girl screamed, asking why no one had praised her. Had they all forgotten how bravely she had blown up the orcs with all that magic? Turning to her, the boy asked who had asked her to blow everyone up. She had killed so many orcs whom they would have enslaved and worked to death. Cheryl stuck her tongue out at her brother. He stared sternly ahead, explaining that the land available to them had now increased fivefold, and he believed it was time to discuss the efficient use of this land. He proposed developing dungeons. His subordinates stared at him in surprise, asking what kind of development this was. The duchy administrator, a spy from the poor aristocracy, Max, gasped in surprise, asking if he really intended to use the dungeon to imprison tourists. Eren turned to the man with a fan and asked, "He's already made a plan, right?" He smiled, saying he'd been a bit busy, but had still managed to do it. He placed a large scroll on the table, opened it with a wave of his hand, and declared it to be the master plan for the dungeon opening and development project. The plan took up the entire large table. His subordinates looked at it with varying emotions. Eren clapped his hands, saying he'd done a good job. He placed his hand on Kainos' shoulder, and remarked that the plan was missing two important details. The dragon's mouth dropped open in surprise, asking what he missed. Pointing a finger, Eren declared that they would treacherously frame adventurers, forcing them on the brink of death to sign a contract that would make them his slaves. Max gaped in shock, saying, "Master, make people slaves. He's an aristocrat, his reputation." Waving his hand, Eren replied that he didn't care about reputation. The most important thing was not to die of hunger here. Even aristocrats were human just like all his subjects. Without food, he would die too. He looked at Kindness, who laughed loudly. The man covered his face with his fan and said that he was excellent at transcending simple logic. It was shameful and disgraceful that he, his strategist, had misunderstood their intentions. He would definitely add the adventurous treachery to the plan. Clutching his head in dismay, Max thought this was madness. At this rate, the duchy would surely perish. The next day, Eren and the others walked down the street. Turning to the old man, he asked if he was really in charge of city sanitation. The bald man, looking at him, said yes. He was 100% certain they wouldn't starve to death under his command, so he'd happily use the entire winter budget for it. Grimacing with displeasure, Eren replied that there was food, especially since they had savings. The old man shrugged and said, "What savings? Didn't he think equipment for the war with the orcs just fell out of the sky?" Glancing sideways at the residents, he said he thought this city cleanup would be enough, and that there was no need to waste any more money on it. A vein bulged in Eren's angry face. Pointing his finger, he angrily yelled at him, asking how many times he had to tell him that cleaning wasn't just for show to keep people from getting sick. The city needed to be cleaned constantly, and they should pay the workers with food obtained after the war with the orcs. The financier exhaled, saying that they would all soon come to an end. Looking around the street, Eren thought that at this rate, they would indeed run out of food and have no sanitation. But how could they solve this? One of the men pointed and told Captain Rommel that it was a nun illegally performing healing again. Turning, the boy asked who the nun was. A glow was visible behind the crowd. Looking there, Rommel said that it must be a nun from the Vivian Order healing the people again. Eren imagined the cloaked men and thought that as he remembered, this religious order would soon disappear under the onslaught of another. Then his eyes widened and he asked, "Healing the people?" A guard with a spear stood behind, shouting that this was unacceptable. Who authorized the illegal use of religious magic? The assembled people fell silent. Then they began to disperse. The hooded girl apologized, saying she didn't know. The guard watched them walk away. A man held a baby and begged the priestess to heal his son. He was dying. The old man shouted that if they were driving them out, they should at least build a hospital. These girls were helping them somehow, so why were they driving them out? The man grabbed the warrior by the robes and shouted, asking if he was ready to answer for his son's death. The nun threw up her hands, trying to stop them, saying they would return. The people froze, hearing a satisfied cry. They turned away. Eren held out his palm, indicating that the nun could continue. The girls gathered nearby, whispering. Coming closer, the young man thanked them for helping his subjects. He had no reason to drive them out. He personally allowed them to help people. The villagers raised their hands in jubilation. An embarrassed Cecilia looked at him with gratitude. Eren blushed and turned away. Turning back, he said that the nuns could continue their treatment and that she should come with him. The girl smiled slightly. Walking ahead, Eren wondered what he cared about religion. Free treatment was important. He'd make them work until they died of exhaustion. In the duchy's meeting room, a nun threw herself on his lap. Pushing her aside, Eren wondered if she knew that holy virgins forfeit God's blessing when they touch men. Cecilia looked at him admiringly, asking if he really wanted to build a temple. Taking a sip from his cup, the man replied, "Why not?" Behind the delighted girls stood an enraged old man. Frowning, he shouted, "Why not? They simply didn't have the money. If they built the temple, they'd have nothing in the treasure." Looking at him calmly, the man replied that he knew, but didn't they still have hidden savings? The man furiously shouted that the previous emperor had left him this money for an emergency. Eren declared that the emergency had arrived. The bald man bowed and grimly said he understood. Cecilia, tears in her eyes, smiled and thanked him. Holding out his palm, Eren stopped her and said he had conditions for their order in exchange for such generosity. Interlacing her fingers, the girl carefully asked, "Conditions?" Holding out his palm, Eren confirmed. Eren raised one finger and explained that he was talking about the production of holy water. He'd heard that holy water could be directly created in the temple. Was she willing to promise her assistance in developing their lands and producing holy water? Blushing slightly, the girl happily promised. Fronting slightly, Eren asked. Even if it meant producing as much holy water as he wanted, Cecilia, smiling, closed her eyes and confirmed. A few weeks later, a man ran up the stairs. Aaron turned and saw Kindness. The man with the fan told the master that the orcs had discovered a hidden dungeon located near their fortress. Looking at him, the boy asked what kind of dungeon it was. Introducing the orc chieftain, he said that according to Kurak, this was a long abandoned place. Looking at him, Aaron asked if this was mentioned anywhere in the ancient writings. Wasn't there even a master there? The guy waved his hand and replied that they'd found absolutely nothing. Apparently, the dungeon was now a den of all sorts of creatures. Standing opposite, he asked if they would develop something like this. He found it hard to imagine how they could attract tourists there. Walking thoughtfully beside him, Aaron mused that it was an abandoned dungeon. No one would believe that a high-ranking dungeon had just appeared. His eyes widened, recalling the saint. His lips stretched into a sly smile, and he said he'd had a great idea. He'd found a way to lure adventurers there. Turning abruptly, he pointed and shouted that they were spreading rumors about an elixir of eternal life that could be found there. Kindness looked at him in bewilderment, saying that they had nothing of the sort. Aaron nodded and said that indeed there was. A container of water stood in front of the statue. Kindness watched the girl heal a man. He looked closely, wondering what that light was. The nun was surrounded by a radiance, and he wondered if it was divine power literally bursting from her body. Where did such a being come from? Cecilia turned, seeing the guys. She ran toward the master in admiration. The face of the holy maiden appeared behind her. Kindness closed his eyes from her blinding radiance. Wincing, he wondered if people couldn't sense this divine power. Aaron stepped back, causing the girl to fall, but she rose with a sweet smile. Aaron, embarrassed, looked away and asked how things were going, if everything was fine, and mentally told himself not to forget that Cecilia was his cheap holy water maker. The girl closed her eyes with a smile, and said that he saw they were almost finished. Standing opposite, the boy said he came for holy water. Could she create it yet? Looking at him admiringly, the girl replied, "Of course." She sat by the statue, addressing the goddess Vivian, saying that her devoted servant had come with a plea, asking her to grant them a portion of her energy and create a miracle. The container of water began to glow blindingly. The guys stared at it in surprise. Kindness thought it couldn't be. This wasn't human power. She must be a direct descendant of the goddess. Hadn't she awakened yet? Holding a ladle of water, Aaron told the old man to try it. He was the oldest and sickest there, and the effect would be most noticeable on him. The man took the container, saying that as if simple water could cure it, he could understand if it was real medicine. He took a sip. His eyes widened. When he finished, he exhaled. He stretched, then somersaulted through the air, looking admiringly at his hands. He said he felt 5 years younger and was asked, "Is it better than real medicine?" Aaron smiled at the nun. Then he became indignant when she clung to his hand. The confused young man considered simply pouring some holy water into the dungeon and spreading the rumor that the springs of eternal life were there. But the effectiveness of this water was astonishing. In that case, he should keep Cecilia, his cheap holy water maker, as close as possible. He waved his hand, beckoning Kindness. He came closer, putting his hand to his face. Aaron whispered how difficult it would be to spread such a rumor about the elixir. Covering his mouth with a fan, the man replied that he assured him such powerful holy water was nowhere else. Of course, it wouldn't grant eternal life, but even that would be enough for adventurers. Aaron smiled, saying that since everything was ready, it was time to head to the dungeon. Cecilia looked at him admiringly and said she'd like to introduce him to someone. Looking at him, Aaron asked who. Holding her palms together, she replied, "The captain of the Holy Knights of their order." Aaron looked at her in surprise and asked, "Does the Vivian order have holy knights?" He presented the shining golden shield of the Holy Knights. Its body was armored. Unlike other warriors, they specialize in defense. The knights stood by a blinding flash. They dedicate their body to the divine to withstand and repel any attack. A group of knights stood before the castle. He thought that united, their defense would be as strong as the fortress. Looking down sadly, Cecilia said that they only had one captain of the Holy Knights left. Leaning closer, Aaron whispered, "Will this captain be coming to them?" He turned around when he was called. A red-haired boy, a blonde in knightly armor, approached and told him not to crowd their saint. He wasn't worthy of even standing near her. Aaron asked, displeased. The girl closed her eyes, saying she came because the holy maiden had decided to build a temple here, a dead land with weak people and a useless duke. Smirking, she said it was simply pathetic. Looking sternly, Cecilia told Lady Bianca that she couldn't speak to their lord like that. Aaron rubbed his chin and asked again about weak people. Bianca, standing opposite, confirmed and said she was willing to obey only the strongest. Looking at her indifferently, the boy asked how many she had obeyed in her life. Resolutely beating her chest, the knight declared that so far no one, because no one could match her strength. Aaron smiled and asked if she wanted to make a bet. The blonde was surprised. Aaron held up 3 fingers and said the loser would receive 3 strong blows from the winner, after which they would see if she would submit to him. The girl frowned, calling him a weakling. Aaron grinned confidently. The guys stood facing each other. Arthur shook his head, asking why they should start a battle with an obvious winner. It was painful to watch. A man standing nearby said that the master had defeated the orc with the help of stunning sleep magic. He had intended to fight without a sword. The one standing behind him asked if one of them would get seriously hurt. Looking ahead with concern, Arthur asked what they should do. All they could do was pray. Aaron picked up a branch from the ground. Bianca frowned, asking how dare he fight her with a branch. The guy looked at the branch and told her not to listen to the evil ant. She was very good. The blonde frowned. Holding her shield in front of her, she called upon the goddess Vivin to grant her the power to crush her enemies. Her hair fluttered. Aaron yawned, asking why he was taking so long to prepare for the attack. Afraid of the stick. Rushing forward, the girl ordered him to be quiet. She quickly rushed toward her opponent. A blue glow appeared around the branch. The boy swung it sharply. The attack struck the shield. The girl fell to one knee. Looking down at her, Aaron asked, "Was one blow with the branch really enough?" He slammed the shield again. It cracked. The girl was frightened when it shattered. She fell to her knees. Aaron's eyes blazed as he said that they both remembered the conditions. The loser must endure 3 strong blows. Let them expose themselves. He swung the branch, saying that this was the first blow. The blow landed on the back of the girl's head. The knights closed their eyes in dismay. Swinging his sword, the boy said, "A second blow." Bianca trembled. The boy swung for a 3rd blow. The girl fell to the ground. Standing over her, Aaron said the punishment was over and that she should never dare insult him on his soil again. Barely moving, the knight rose. The guys looked at her in surprise. With a coquettish smile, Bianca said that no one had ever humiliated her so cruelly and asked to make her theirs. Celia covered her mouth with her hand, cutting her off. The boy recoiled in surprise, covering the elder's mouth with her hand. Cecilia said that the captain of the Order of the Holy Knights must have gotten a little carried away reading her favorite novels, and that he shouldn't misunderstand. Confused, Aaron asked what novels she was reading. Glancing sideways at Ramo, he ordered the warriors to be assembled to clear the dungeon. Later, he stood before the lined-up warriors. Kaina stood behind him and heard that having removed the soldiers needed to defend their borders, they had only 100 warriors left, far too few. Pointing at him, the man explained that only 5,000 people lived in Branland. By law, they mobilized every 10th man. So, a large army would require a huge population, which they didn't have. Even if they suddenly gained new residents, they wouldn't have the resources to feed them. Aaron touched his chin thoughtfully, explaining that to attract residents, they first needed to improve their living conditions. The dragon standing nearby said he would try to find a way to improve their dire situation. The red-haired man glanced at him and agreed. He remembered the people on the street, thinking that if he wasn't mistaken, a large number of refugees would appear in the territories of Count Grey and Count Amon at this very time. The dark-haired man looked at him, questioning his actions. The man's eyes widened. He waved his hand and said that as they'd heard, they were heading to the dungeon, clearing everything out and taking the treasure with them. Swords rose. The warriors galloped toward the dungeon. They stopped not far from the orcs. Kurak bowed, greeting the overlord. Dismounting, the boy asked how everything had gone. The chieftain looked away, saying something had happened. Aaron looked at him questioningly, or rather, they were walking through the 2nd floor of a dungeon in the holy grounds of Aten. An orc pointed and said that these brothers had become strange. Cheryl rubbed her shoulders and asked if everyone felt this strange cold. In front of them were orcs engulfed in a purple haze. The guys looked at them in surprise. The possessed orcs bared their teeth. They rushed forward. The chieftain's eyes widened, shouting for them to stop, otherwise the overlord would kill them all. The girl rushed forward. The orc swung his club and threw the attacker back. The monster fell among the others. A gray substance rose from its body. Watching it tensely, Kynes urged caution, saying that these were ghosts. The ghost, engulfed in a purple haze, flew forward. Kurak struck it with his club. The ghost flew towards Aaron. He extended his sword, blocking it. He stared intently at the blade. A multitude of ghosts hovered around the guys. Holding her staff, Cheryl said that these creatures would give her nightmares. A fireball appeared at the end of the staff. The ghosts hovered near the ceiling. Then, they rushed toward the girl. Aaron slashed at them with his sword. The girl summoned a stream of fire from her staff at the enemies. A fiery beam emerged from the ball's mouth. The ghost's remains fell to the floor. The girl turned her back when she heard her name being called. She turned around. Rommel was fighting a ghost and asked for help. They couldn't harm these things. Hiding behind a stone, Kynes remembered he forgot to mention that only magic could harm ghosts. Frowning at him, the man exclaimed that he could have said something earlier. Aiming her staff, Cheryl ordered him to stay put. Fire erupted from the staff. He landed right next to the knight. The tip of the sword burst into flames. Aaron held the burning weapon. Kirok's club also glowed. Then it crumbled into ash. The orb at the end of the staff remained shamefully silent. The knight swung his sword. The dungeon filled with flames. Ghosts fell to the ground. They rushed like a whirlwind toward the light, screaming loudly. The guys covered their ears. The ghost had gathered into a single enormous monster. It flew toward the entrance. The black substance seemed to smile. A burning blade flashed past it. Putting away his sword, Aaron asked, "Is that all?" Touching the books on the shelf, Kynes said that it seemed the ghosts were here for a reason. Perhaps they were guarding something. Cheryl held one of the books and offered her brother a look. He glanced at it. In her hands was a book called Legacy of the Ancients. She remembered people praying and said that during the time of the Demon Empire, there had been a temple of some group of monks here. Her eyes widened in surprise when she read about spiritual power training. Looking at her, her brother asked, "What?" The girl holding the book read that unlike mages who used external power, these monks could tap into a different kind of power, a spiritual one. Touching his chin, Aaron said he'd never heard of such a thing before and thought that even a decade ago, someone knew about it. He introduced the characters next to the vessels and explained that essentially a mage's external power is a vessel filled with mana that they receive at birth, while spiritual power is a vessel that can be expanded and modified. Handing the book to Kynes, he asked if he'd ever heard of such an art. Thoughtfully opening the book, the man said it was intriguing. If it were true, as Mistress Cheryl explained, then through spiritual training, even an ordinary person could use magic. The boy clapped his hand loudly and exclaimed, "Does that mean their soldiers can master magic too?" The man frowned, saying that even if that were true, he didn't think it was worth trying yet. Looking at him, the red-haired man asked why. The dungeon looked gloomy, and he suggested looking around. The entire dungeon was covered in blood with signs of endless fighting everywhere. Looking away, the man said that perhaps the training of this power was so inhumane, or the power itself so dangerous, that they ended up simply killing each other. Aaron looked at the book and said he'd hide it for now. On the third level of the dungeon, the boy was fighting, agreeing to nothing. The guys looked at a chest full of gold. Turning, Aaron said that since they were finished, Kirok could take half of the treasure. They would leave the rest here. Closing his eyes, Kynes asked the master if he would allow him to collect half the gold. Looking at him, the boy asked what for. The guy covered his face with a fan and said that since the dungeon was fairly simple, it would be difficult to put the adventurers in a critical situation. Touching his chin, Aaron said he thought that was true. Kynes spread his hands, saying that with this gold he could add a few additions to the dungeon. Looking up at him, the boy asked again. The orcs were repairing the dungeon. As a result, a labyrinth appeared within it. Kynes stood in one of the passages. With a smile, he said that the foundation of the labyrinth was complete. A bright glow appeared around the man, and he declared that he was an ancient dragon, commanding all the dead. He pointed his fan forward and commanded them to rise. A whirlwind flew through the labyrinth's passages. Bones rose into the air. Skeletons were formed from them. Ghosts began to appear in the passages. They rose upward. Standing in the labyrinth, the man said he thought a couple of torches should be added. Water filled a small spring. Kynes scooped some into a flask and spoke something in an unknown language. The water in the flask glowed. He poured it into the spring and touched it with his little finger. Licking his finger, the man said it tasted good, was suitable for this place, and would prolong life for about a year. The dragon smiled, saying that all that remained was to find greedy customers. The dungeon was a gloomy labyrinth. People crowded at the castle gates. Turning away, the guard ordered them to be lowered. The gates opened. The man touched his hat and said that heavy rain would come and when would this winter finally end. Walking forward, he noted that all the guards here were wearing new armor. Walking behind, the hairy girl asked if they had found something in that new dungeon, an artifact, for example. Otherwise, she couldn't imagine why they were wasting so much money. Pointing, the man asked if she thought there were unnecessary expenses there, too. The windows in the building were lit up. The man smiled slightly and said that the others were still under construction, but that was true, just like the new one. Closing her eyes, the girl nodded and said that meant they were happily awaiting their kind, or more precisely, they were waiting for gold, which they would spend on alcohol and food. Smiling slightly, the man in the hat said that if that was the entrance fee, he would spend enough there. The bell and the door rang. The man standing at the counter greeted Gerald. He waved his hat and asked how many people he had robbed to build such a tavern. The second floor was also an inn. After all, the owner smiled, saying that he hadn't robbed anyone, that it had all been done on credit. In any case, had they heard about the new dungeon? A crowd of people would be arriving here soon, so they should hurry while they had time. Gerald laughed and said he hadn't expected to hear such a rush from him. He looked around. Handing the man a coin, the man asked what he knew about the dungeon. Crossing his arms, he explained that he'd heard rumors of a source of eternal life. Gerald brought his ear closer. He was surprised to hear a whisper that they were the first adventurers going there. Tossing his friend a coin, the man said he never lets anyone down. He should bring something to eat, and they'll enrich this tavern. The next morning, Aaron sat engulfed in blue flames. Before him was an open book on spiritual power. He closed his eyes and thought that he couldn't yet harness the dragon's blessing to its full potential. Linus had rightly observed that these teachings could be dangerous, but he needed his own power, his own. He tensed. A blue haze spread around him. The girl approached and called for the master. He opened his eyes. Cecilia looked at him in surprise. Coming to, Aaron jumped back and asked what was wrong. Did he need something? The girl was holding a plate of sandwiches and said she came to somehow express all her feelings. The embarrassed boy held the plate. He looked away, hearing something. A knight was running toward them and the girl said she would go. She ran to the gate. Aaron sighed lovingly. The knight hit himself in the chest with his fist and said the adventurers had arrived. Aaron was delighted and asked how many slaves there were. The next day, horsemen galloped toward the dungeon. A wooden sign read in spring. A group of people approached the gate. The red-haired girl looked at the sign and asked what the conditions were. The entrance fee was 10 gold. After paying, the knight handed her a scroll and told her that this was the payment slip and that she shouldn't lose it as it was her pass to the dungeon. The knights blocked Gerald's passage, saying they couldn't enter without proof of payment. Raising his eyebrows, the man said what they just bought. The knight opened his mouth, saying 10 gold pieces per person. The people in line became agitated, saying it was robbery. That money could feed a family for 3 months. It was some kind of scam. The guard held a spear, declaring that he was now declaring the words of the owner of the brand lands, Duke Aaron, and quoted that they could always earn 10 gold, but the elixir of eternal life could run out at any moment. Let them decide for themselves what was more valuable. The adventurer reached into his pocket and placed a bag in the man's palm. Those interested went to the man, who said that the dungeon was inhabited by numerous undead. If they wanted to defeat them, they only needed holy water, 1 gold piece. Gerald showed him a bottle and said he had some. Looking away, the cunning man said it was water from another church. They, poor things, didn't know that the holy water of the Vivian Church was far more powerful. The man grimly adjusted his hat. He paid a few coins to the man, who thanked him. Folding his hands, the merchant asked if he would like more magical equipment. Gerald, closing his eyes, angrily asked to see. A man stood by a sign that said, "Emergency rescue request costs 100 gold per person," and asked what the scam was this time. The man handed him a gray stone. Touching his chest, he honestly said there was no scam. It was a special artifact designed for adventurers. For just 100 gold, he could save his life. What a miracle. Looking at it intently, Gerald asked, "What if they didn't make the request?" Crossing his arms, the man replied that they wouldn't charge them then. The adventurer glanced sideways at the entrance, wondering if they found the source of eternal life there. They would earn tens of times more than they had spent here. The guys entered the dungeon. A row of magic orbs stood on the table. Aaron and Kynes greedily gazed into one of them. Kirok turned when he was called. Aaron placed a hand on his shoulder and said that holy water would make the battle with the ghosts easier in an hour, and that he should come down and heat things up. On the second floor of the dungeon, a girl was sending arrows of ice forward. She poured out water, freezing the ghosts. Black shadows flew down the corridor. The man in the hat held a flask, saying that without the water, everything would be much more difficult. They stopped at the stairs and the man asked, "Isn't that the top floor?" Black shadows were approaching them with a roar. The man held holy water and shouted for them to receive it. He threw the flask at the monster. It smashed on its head and a black shadow hit the man. He fell down the stairs. An orc in ghost form approached the others. Gerald, his mouth open, shouted that they were mutant ghosts and told them to draw their weapons. Many ghosts with green legs ran through the labyrinth. The man, his mouth open in terror, exclaimed that there were too many of them and they needed to run. They rushed down the stairs. A green hand held the cloth. Kurok, smiling, tore it off. Gerald hurried down the stairs. He looked back, wondering if they had escaped. Anna with her staff summoned light. It illuminated the dark tunnel. The man in the hat said it was a labyrinth, perfect for a minotaur. He looked at the wounded man and asked what had happened to Ouz. The other man silently shook his head. Gerald, with a serious expression, suggested leaving him here and going to the spring themselves, as he would be better off there. A group of fighters with a torch walked through the dungeon. Suddenly, the fighter in the hat sensed something. He turned around in fear and shouted to be careful. Several arrows flew at them. The fighters repelled the attack with their shields. Ferocious orcs rushed forward, screaming for the death of the strangers. A frightened Gerald declared that they needed to run. The boys retreat in horror. Arrows strike them and they fall to the ground. A fighter in a hat lifts them up, saying that if they fall, they will die. A group of people heads down the corridors. He, shocked, tries to figure out which way to run. Arrows land in front of them and stick into the walls. Gerald desperately shouts that they need to move to the right. Arrows land behind them, and he asks Anna to hold them back. The sorceress with the staff activates the ice world. The orc begins to chop at the barrier with an axe. Gerald, frightened, asks her to hold them back a little longer. A bright light appears in front of the girl, activating the ice world. An ice barrier appears in front of her. Skeletons aim their bows. An arrow pierces the leg of the fighter with the sword as well as his partner. They fall to the ground. Anna desperately activates an endless stream of light. The skeletons aiming their bows are shocked to see the glow. Their skulls shatter. Aaron moves forward. A swordsman screams loudly that something is happening to the wall. Suddenly, a torrent of water washes him away. Water fills the corridors and all the boys are in danger. Gerald begins to swim, screaming loudly in fear. Waves wash over everything around him. Anna lies on the ground and they beg her to wake up. The fighter in the hat points and asks to look. The sorceress looks on in surprise. They see a bright glow in front of them. The delighted girl says it is the source of life. Suddenly, her face becomes frightened, urging them to run immediately. The boys turn, perplexed by what is happening. A giant bull with an axe stands in front of them. He begins to bellow in rage, his eyes red. He drags his axe across the floor. They begin to run. Gerald, frightened, sees his eyes and hears that they are finished. He falls to the floor and the artifact lands next to him. Surprised, he remembers the words about holding 3 stones simultaneously. He shakes his head, realizing that he needs 100 gold pieces for each. A huge bull slowly approaches him. Then it suddenly begins to run, looking ferocious. Gerald screams in horror. Fighters appear before the monster and receive a powerful blow to the shield. They fly off. An ice arrow flies into its head. The enormous monster stands before a red-haired girl with a staff. It picks her up and lifts her off the ground. It slams her into the ground with all its might, and she screams in pain. Gerald, frightened, picks up a stone and asks where help is. The giant swings his weapon fiercely. The fighter in the hat covers his face in fear. Several knights with swords block its blow. The enraged bull feels the damage, drops its axe, and runs away. Arthur extends his hand, asking if everything is all right. Gerald, sitting on the ground, nervously asks if everything looks all right. The mustachioed man smiles and remarks that he actually saved his life. The source of life shines before them. Aaron plunges the flask into the magical water. He looks at her in surprise, sighing. Arthur, in armor, asks if they're coming. A group of knights walks away from the source of life. An orc sits next to a frightened bull. Rain drips from the dark sky. Gerald stands joyfully beneath it, shouting that they survived. 3 cloaked girls approach him. The astonished fighter asks what the priests are doing here. One of them, smiling, holds up a sheet of paper and declares that if he needs treatment, he can simply place his thumb on it. He examines the sheet. It states that the special treatment costs 300 gold pieces per person. They guarantee survival, but bear no responsibility for the consequences. If the full amount isn't paid after the contract is signed, the cost will increase by 50% monthly. And if the debt is not repaid, the body will become the property of the Duke for 10 years. Gerald carefully counts on his fingers, saying that until he pays the 300 gold pieces, he'll have to pay an additional 150 each month. The priest stands near the wounded and asks if he really will think while his comrades die. The man in the hat sighs despairingly. He presses his finger to the magical paper. Suddenly, a chest of coins appears. Kindness bows to the Duke, saying they've taken everything as ordered, including several slaves. Aaron, smiling, remarks that it was excellent work, all thanks to him and his trust. The old man stands before the chest of coins and asks if this really wasn't a dream. The Duke raises his hand and declares it's time to tackle the second dungeon. Shouts of understanding echo throughout the street. Workers are building a house. It's said that Aaron used the proceeds to improve the lives of the people living on his land. The remaining funds were used to build a city for adventurers. After a fruitful winter, they built this city called Aten. The Duke stands on a wooden tower in the center of the city. He looks ahead and reflects on how they built the city, but the problem with the human population remains. He seriously realizes that only orcs can live there. He sees a white bird before him. She tosses him a scroll which he immediately opens. It reads a letter about a gold mine being discovered on the border between the Count Grey and Amon, raising the possibility of a dispute over ownership. Aaron, smiling, realizes that if they don't have the men, they'll just have to recruit them. A disconcerted Rommel asks if there really will be a war. The Duke nods, claiming that a gold mine has been discovered on the border between the two counties and that he won't allow them to seize his territory. The aide desperately cries out that these lands are theirs only on paper, having long since been divided between Grey and Amma, and Aaron, with a serious expression, argues that this is why he wants to take advantage of the situation, asking if it's not the best time with both counts at odds. Rommel, sitting next to him, asks if the ruler is planning to wage war against both counties at once, given that their forces are 5 times their own and even far greater. The Duke calmly states that this territory is important to them and that the heads of those counties are Bran's vassals, meaning his. Cheryl, surprised, asks if this won't attract the Emperor's attention, as then he will definitely intervene. Aaron, closing his eyes, declares that he cannot intervene as long as his reasons are legitimate, and decides he is only waiting for his defeat. The old man sits in anger hearing about the problems in the army. Suddenly he slams his fists on the table and shouts at the Duke. The frightened man notices Cain. The old man, furious, declares that they must kill everyone who encroaches on the territory that rightfully belongs only to them. Confused, Aaron tries to speak. The man angrily holds his hand and assures him that it's not about the gold mine, but about their right to it. Aaron, shocked, pulls his hand away, hearing that he didn't do everything for profit and is ready to devote himself entirely. While he needs to concentrate on the war, the door suddenly opens, calling for the Duke. They turn around in shock. Arthur nervously announces that an urgent message has arrived, claiming Grey and Amon's armies are in front of the gold mine. Aaron, with a serious expression, understands that they must act now. He holds out his hand and orders Rommel to quickly gather the knights as they are heading straight there. Soldiers have gathered around the tent, and inside shouts can be heard about the enemy being a stupid idiot as he has owned this mountain for 10 years. The other shouts that they haven't even arrived yet, and this land already belonged to him. Grey and Amon push each other, shouting that one of them is a thick-headed egg as their ancestors owned this land. The enemy shouts that he is not an earl but a fish, as he shouted that he has owned it for only 10 years. The army approaches them. A golden crown is visible on the blue banner. The surprised soldiers realize it is the flag of Duke Bran. Grey and Amon are frightened and wonder why he is here. Aaron, on horseback clad in armor, stops. The Duke swallowed dust. Aaron, smiling, asks how they are doing. They bow in greeting. Aaron, furious, asks what they're doing on his land and tells them to get out of here. They are shocked by what he says. Aaron waves his hand and declares that according to the Emperor's decree, everything here belongs to him. One of the dukes asks furiously. Another stops him. The man bows and assures them that this land has belonged to his ancestors since time immemorial. Because if the Duke insists it's his, they'll have a hard time. Aaron, enraged, draws his sword and asks how he dares to go against the royal family's word. All the fighters draw their blades. Cainus approaches them and asks why they don't try to negotiate. The counts are shocked to hear about the war. The man, with a slight smile, says he's heard rumors of their preparations. The count, furious, shouts that it's their business alone. Aaron points a finger and claims that in that case they should join forces. He'll gather 1,000 warriors and the two of them will gather the same number, and if they win he'll take the land. The counts look at each other silently. One of them asks for time to think. They converse behind the tent about how the lands belong to the Duke. The law is clearly on his side. One of the counts, smirking, suggests shutting the idiot up and dividing the wealth between them. The bald one, smiling, declares that it's not a bad idea. They can take advantage of this opportunity and split everything produced by the mine equally. Cainus stands next to the Duke and says that judging by everything, they won't accept his offer. Aaron, smiling, tells him not to even think about it because their greed knows no bounds. The assistant looks at him and asks why he thinks so. Aaron holds out his hands and asserts that this isn't just a mine, but a huge gold mine. Then, in a quiet whisper, he tells him he spread that rumor. Cainus asks again, astonished, declaring that such a thing is impossible. Aaron smirks and declares that his original goal was these 2 villages and the gold mine was merely a trap. A month ago, Aaron stood with a letter. He holds it and reads that there are no conflicts between the counts. Losing his thoughts, He realizes they truly had no intention of starting a war. He begins to smile slightly, saying that if there wasn't one, then he needs to create one himself. He writes with a quill about spreading a rumor about a huge gold mine located between their lands. The counts stand before Eren. One of them agrees to these conditions, but also puts forward two of their own. First, they reserve the right to choose the territory. The war begins here, and he gets to choose the date. Eren calmly asks what else. The count places paper and quill, declaring that if they win, they demand ownership of this mountain and the exclusion of their territories from Brand County. The signed treaty will also be sent to the Emperor for certification. Eren, shocked, asks again about the certification. The counts exchange glances, thinking they've caught him off guard. One of them gestures, saying that without the Emperor's approval there can be no war. Eren, sitting opposite, begins to think. He picks up the quill and says that in that case everything will happen in a month. The men grin sarcastically, realizing his plans are over. Eren smiles as they realize he's literally informing the Emperor that he's giving them the land. The riders along with the Duke and his assistant gallop through the forest. Kindness, closing his eyes, says that although everything is going according to plan, problems are definitely inevitable. Eren turns around wondering what he's talking about. The man explains with a serious expression that even if they manage to gather warriors, they won't number more than 500. Furthermore, if the Emperor is informed of the war, he and Cheryl will have a difficult time. Eren, looking at him, agrees, stating that they can't even properly utilize the orc's power, specifying that he can ask Cain to look for mercenaries. The assistant nervously says that they should consider the fact that the gold mine doesn't exist. He supported them in the war, but if the old man learns the truth, it could disrupt the war. Eren introduces the angry old man and says they'll find a way to convince him. But for now, it's best to pretend ignorance. The man looks at the orange sky and hopes his younger sister has succeeded. The boys gallop forward to the castle. Guards point their spears at Eren, claiming that the Duke is gone and can get away. The elf, with a sad expression, asks to see the Duke. The frightened soldier stands at attention, hearing the question. What's going on? He notices that the master has returned. The girl turns around in surprise. Eren sits before her on a horse. She falls to her knees and cries for help, introducing herself as Kaisha, the chief elf's daughter. Eren, with a serious expression, asks why the elf dared to come here and ask for help, especially after they killed their people. A forest with tree houses is visible, and it is explained that the wood elves live in the far north of Bran, not far from the dragon's nest. They have always lived apart from other species, even humans, creating a semblance of another world in their village. A man with an arrow in his leg lies on the ground, and it is said that their method of defending the village is too militant, so much so that the people of Bran, even Eren, cannot forget it. The elf, with tears in her eyes, assures them that evil spirits have attacked them and are destroying the village. If they help them, she promises that the elves and humans will become friends. Eren considers the need to capture both the evil spirits and the elves and asks if she offers an alliance. Eren, with a serious face, insists he'll help, but an alliance won't be enough. The elf desperately says they have gold and will give it to them. Eren, with an air of importance, urges them to become official residents of the duchy's territory. Kaisha, kneeling in shock, asks again. Eren, with a serious expression, says that since she came she represents the interests of her people, so whether she agrees or not. The elf nervously says that even if she does she can hardly make such a decision. The Duke rides off on horseback, saying she can forget what she was told. The elf desperately shouts her agreement. Eren, smiling, declares that in that case they will sign the contract, so let her follow him. The dismayed council members hear about the Death Knight. Kaisha, trembling with fear, declares that it was indeed him, and that he has thousands of zombies and skeletons with him. Eren, with a serious look, thinks that perhaps this is the work of a demon, or a master necromancer. They need to hurry and save as many elves as possible. The Duke points his fingers and declares he gives them 3 hours to get ready. Rommel must gather the knights. Cecilia will take care of the priests. Bianca must be informed so the holy warriors can be ready in kindness, and he will go to the orcs. Eren, looking stern, shouts that there is no time to waste. They must save the future inhabitants of Bran. Thousands of skeletons attack the elven village from the northern side of the dark forest. A huge fence lies before them. A sorceress with a staff begins casting spells. Plants entangle their legs. Skeletons with red eyes try to break through. The elf with a green staff declares that they must act now and fire. The mages point their staves skyward. A giant magical net flies through the air. It heads straight for the horde of skeletons. It falls on them and entangles them. The skeletons try to escape and fall to the ground. A Death Knight with flaming paws attacks. He picks up a mountain of skeletons and lifts them off the ground. His eyes are filled with red. Purple rays pierce this barrier. Thousands of bones fly up. The zombies run toward the fence. They pile on top of each other, trying to climb over. The sorceress nervously emits a stream of green energy. Shark trees fly forward. Vines grab the zombies. The skeletons grab onto giant shoots. They try to hold on to them. An elf stands behind the commander and nervously says that they need fire. She lowers her head and mentally apologizes to the spirits of the forest for this. In a rage, she declares total incineration. An explosion occurs, engulfing everything around. A fire is visible in front of the fence. Sparks fly everywhere. The Death Knight extends his hand and orders an attack. Hordes of zombies rush forward, growling and hissing with terrifying faces. Suddenly, their heads disperse. The scythe-wielding villain watches in shock. A giant dragon flies above him. Several dragons fly over the battlefield. Ropes are visible on their tails and someone orders holy water to be dropped. The mechanical dragons shoot water. It hits the undead who begin screaming in pain. Eren holds his sword and orders an attack. Their target is an elven village, and they must stay close together. The Duke's army, led by him, charges forward. They encounter the undead. The knights bravely wield their swords. The villain with red eyes turns around. He forms a purple ball of energy above himself, commanding the undead to rise. The zombies rise again under the influence of his magic. They ferociously charge at the riders. Bianca loudly orders the knights to form a shield block. The soldiers place their shields in front of them. She begins to glow, asking the goddess to grant them the power to overthrow their enemies. A powerful magical beam erupts from the sky. A bright flash occurs. The zombies stretch out their hands. Seeing the flash, a bright light fills everything around. They are incinerated by such a powerful attack. Rommel, enraged, screams about the Death Knight. He and his army rush to attack him. The villain sees him. A fighter holds a flaming sword. He gallops confidently while another throws something at the villain. A blue bottle flies towards the villain. Holy water scatters on him. Rommel, flying past, deftly cuts off his bony arm. Suddenly, his head falls from his shoulders. The zombies and skeletons look on in shock. Rommel, with an air of importance, shouts that the Death Knight is defeated. They can't stop. They must fight. Eren watches the battle unfold and says that as planned, they have stopped the advance of the undead. An aide stands next to the Duke who asks Kindness what to do next. The man with the fan declares that the Death Knight is simply a puppet. They need to kill the necromancer or demon that controlled him. If it was a demon, Cecilia would find it. Eren turns around and asks her if she heard what needs to be done. She pets her horse and assures him that she has already done everything. The surprised man says he understands her. The girl points and assures him that it is there. A purple light is visible on the mountain. The horned villain, enraged, calls them damned insects. Standing on a cliff, she screams that they don't even know how much time she wasted on the Death Knight. And now she's back to controlling everyone. She forms a purple sphere with her hands, summoning fallen souls to follow her heart. Her eyes glow, and she screams for them to fulfill her will. Suddenly, she receives a powerful blow to the head, her face contorting in pain. The girl falls to the ground, clutching her horned head and sighing from the damage she sustained. She's horned, seeing the tip of a sword in front of her. Eren points the weapon at her, declaring, "How dare he do this to his future people?" She jumps back sharply, her eyes filled with hatred, asking if the guy really called her that. In anger, she generates a clot of energy in her hands, calling him an idiot. She unleashes a powerful beam, wishing him dead. The stream of energy rushes toward Eren. He rushes forward. Using his sword, he deftly cuts through her attack. The astonished girl sees this. Suddenly, blood flows from her mouth. The Duke pompously declares that she has time to think before all the mana drains from her heart. The choice is to die or become a slave. The terrified necromancer kneels, unable to believe what he's saying. Eren's eyes blaze, certain this isn't human strength. Eren watches her closely and says that if she remains silent, it means she wants to die. The horned girl, kneeling, speaks his name. The Duke introduces himself calmly. She touches the tip of her sword with her claw and a sign appears. The succubus Elena, kneeling, vows her allegiance to him. A bright seal is visible on the blade. The elves look ahead, one of them shouting that the enemy is retreating. An army of undead is visible on the horizon, fleeing. The soldiers raise their spears, shouting that the evil spirits have been defeated. Kindness and the girls are riding on horseback. The man looks back and asks where the master is. He turns at the sound. Eren gallops on horseback, the succubus behind him, calling it good work. The assistant bows, asking about the demon. Eren, with a serious expression, declares that he didn't have time as she escaped before his arrival and will definitely not return anytime soon. Cecilia sees the girl behind him and asks who she is. The Duke dismounts and explains that he picked her up along the way. She was a demon's servant. The sorceress trembles and says that although she's not a demon, her aura is filled with evil. Cecilia confidently asserts that they must purify her. The frightened succubus is already forming energy in her hands. The Duke stands in front of his subordinate and declares that she will not do this. Cecilia, surprised, asks why. Aaron, frowning, says he'll explain later. For now, it's better not to. In her memories, she made a vow of submission. A mark was imprinted on the weapon. He pulled it out of her. The succubus cried out in pain. The surprised horned girl hears an order to force the evil spirits to retreat. The Duke standing before her hears the question that she doesn't need to destroy her army. Aaron calmly agrees, declaring that he will use them as he pleases. Cecilia, closing her eyes, says she understands. Aaron, smiling sheepishly, thanks her because right now his head is aching over many things. A group of elves approaches them, thanking them because without them they wouldn't have lasted a day. Aaron calmly declares that he merely fulfilled the terms of the contract. The elven commander, placing his hand on his heart, asserts that they will follow his example. The surprised Duke asks if this is true. The warrior seriously agrees, as elves always keep their word. Aaron takes out a piece of paper and exclaims that then they will easily become his subjects. The elves read what is written there in shock. Kaisha, kneeling, apologizes to her mother, saying that this is how the situation was. The red-haired guy, bowing his head, asks if they perhaps want to break the contract. The commander silently closes her eyes. She bends her knee, saying that they obey him, clarifying how to address him. Aaron seriously speaks of Master, as all his subjects call him. The elves go to the gates. It is said that Aaron has received 1,500 who lost half their population to evil spirits. They walk through the streets. He says, "There is no one here." The Duke, closing his eyes, says he's glad to see them in the city of explorers. As they've noticed, there's a labor shortage here, and of course, they'll have to feed themselves. The elf turns to the child and says they only have enough food to get them started. The armored Duke pauses. The boy looks at her and says he'll offer a deal, asking if he should start with the good or the bad. The elf, perplexed, names the good. Aaron, with a serious expression, declares he'll provide 1,000 elves with a month's supply of food. The surprised commander asks what about the remaining 500 and whether that's the bad part of the deal. Aaron calmly declares he has a use for the rest. So, he gives them a week to gather 500 elves and send them to his castle to serve. The shocked elf asks again. Aaron, smirking, says that judging by everything, all the offers in this deal are good. Aaron moves a chess piece. Smiling, he declares he's lost and most likely no one is more capable than His Highness in this game. The ruler laughs, declaring that the opponent is actually the absolute champion and that if he'd played at full strength, victory would have been his. An old man enters the room and says the king must attend a meeting. His vassals are waiting. The crown ruler says they only played once and would like to spend the day with a friend. If a formal presence is necessary, could an assistant fill in for him? The man declares that Count Grey and Amon are asking his permission to begin the war. The ruler waves him off, saying he should bring it, sign it, and let them fight to their heart's content. The interlocutor with a serious expression says that this time things are more serious as this war is encroaching on Duke Aaron's territory. The king with a stern expression asks about his nephew. His charge nods. The ruler rises from his chair. Standing before his friend, he says that the game will have to be postponed, and next time he should play at full strength. He turns and leaves. With a serious expression, he wonders if Aaron really wants to end things so badly. The king sits on the throne before the council. The king declares that he has heard about the war in Bran territory, asking if rumors have already reached every corner of the empire. He wants to know their opinion on the war. He looks at the gay-haired advisor who smirks. The representative of the imperial faction calmly states that Duke Aaron has every right to the discovered gold mine. So, the war petition must be approved. The representative of the neutral faction, shocked, shouts that this war will be unfavorable for Aaron because if they lose, the entire Bran territory will end. A gray-haired man asks sternly that war is against imperial law. Doesn't that mean they can refuse since they can't go against the law they themselves created? His opponent, closing his eyes, says he's right. In a memory from his deathbed, he was asked to protect children. The king smirks at him. He begins to rise from his throne and says his words make sense. But that's not enough to go against the law. The ruler confidently asserts his approval of this war and asks for the documents to be brought to him. He sits at a table holding a chess piece and allowing entry. The gray-haired man bows and says he has arrived as requested. The ruler, without taking his eyes off the piece, asks if the Duke can read minds. Surprised, his charge asks what he means. The king smirks and says that during their conversation about war, the shocked man remains silent. The ruler, laughing loudly, declares himself so surprised when he said what was on his mind. For a duke who hasn't been in the imperial faction for very long, this is commendable. The subject laughs nervously. The king happily declares himself pleased to have someone who shares his intentions at his side. This is a great thing for the empire. The gay-haired man assures him that the ruler is flattering him. He merely expressed his opinion, primarily based on the law. They sit at the table and the ruler inquires about the outcome of the war, whether the counts will win or not. He hears with a serious expression that the counts will undoubtedly win. An army of 1,000 against 2,000 warriors. The king, lost in thought, says he has a bad feeling about this given Aaron's overconfidence in entering this war. The aide calmly declares that rumors are circulating that his vassal is a debt to Grey. He will advise the best way to repay the count. He continues confidently to say that 30 mercenary mages will reassure him that it will all be legal, and that the royal family will have nothing to do with it. The ruler looks at him and says that he really can read minds because that's how it will be. He begins to laugh loudly. With a sinister grin, he asserts that there will be enough mages. The action takes place in the capital of the empire. The doors open. The maid bows saying that they are waiting for her again, and that she should come. The girl wears elegant shoes, beautiful bracelets on her hands, charming pendants around her neck. Cheryl walks with bags. Smiling, she thinks about how it even became easier to breathe. Shopping really does relieve stress. She walks down the street and wonders where else to stop. Troubles are waiting around the corner. She passes, the scoundrels following. The girl listens wearily. Cheryl happily realizes that she has dealt with the stress. It's time to deal with her brother's errand. She turns the corner followed by the hooligans. They run after her with mocking expressions. In shock, they open their eyes, noticing something. A girl with a smirk forms magic in her hand. A powerful explosion occurs in the middle of the city. She grabs one of the bandits by the robe. She looks the frightened hooligan straight in the eye and declares she won't repeat it twice, asking where the secret casino is. The sun falls on an old castle standing among the hills. The beaten hooligans escort Cheryl out. One of them opens the doors. She shields herself from the blinding light. She sees before her a gigantic room filled with people. The crowd raises papers and shouts about betting on Aaron or Grey. Cheryl sees this and wonders what's going on. The main board announces the brand war. Duke Aaron versus the Alman and Grey alliance with the outcome in 25 days. The girl, smiling, realizes she's found what she needs. The red-haired dwarf takes off his hat and says they represent the Empire Monetization Group, offering them a chance to become rich. First, he wants to express his gratitude to those who honored the betting palace with their visit today. People wave their hands, shouting for him to shut up and take the bet. The host glares at them. He calls 2 thugs over. They grab the offender, who begs them to let him go. The red-haired gnome on stage shouts again that they kicked this insolent man out, not because of the insult, but because he wasted their precious time, so their time is worth its weight in gold. The crowd joyfully chants for Lumpy. The gnome enthusiastically thanked them for their attention, because now the main event of the day, the one that shook the empire, is over. People can bet on the outcome of the war. People raise papers, shouting about bets on the alliance. The bucket with the alliance account is full of papers. People raise their hands shouting about Aaron and the 3 million bet. They are shocked to see the girl and wonder if she really bets 3 million on the Duke. Cheryl holds the paper aloft. She comes closer. Lumpy is shocked. The host, surprised, says that the amount must be paid immediately. He smiles and standing opposite asks how she'll deposit 3 million. The girl shrugging her shoulders asks if this isn't a casino since if he gives money they just need to take it. She then asks why he's asking so many questions. She pulls out a piece of paper and presents a letter. A shocked Lumpy reads about the trading group. Cheryl happily agrees, saying it's a check for 3 million gold from one of the Empire's most famous trading groups. She enters the portal and is surprised to see Aaron standing before her. Aaron looks at her with a serious expression and says he couldn't just sit there asking how everything went. The red-haired sister insists she did everything as he asked, wondering how he managed to persuade Cain since they mortgaged almost all the land. They stand in the middle of the prison and Aaron says the old man doesn't really know yet because he was busy, but there's no need to worry about that. Cheryl, surprised, asks again. Aaron, smiling, winks and asks if it's easier to ask for forgiveness than permission. Cain angrily slams the table, shouting that the mine doesn't exist, furiously asking how much he paid to mortgage the land. Aaron, arms crossed, calmly replies that it costs 3 million. Cain falls to his knees and tearfully screams at the emperor that his son destroyed everything he bequeathed to him. And how can this be explained? Aaron with a serious face says he has a plan and that the old man can calm down. Cain furiously asks what other plan he could have. starving to death on a small plot of land. Aaron with a grimace sighs. He gets up from the table and asks to follow him as he will explain everything clearly. The old assistant looks at him in surprise. Bright lightning strikes the mountains. The old man stands in front of them sighing loudly. Aaron in armor and with a sword stands nearby and says that he didn't believe it. The shocked assistant asks him to take everything. Aaron is surprised and asks what he means. A joyful Kane holds his hand and asks him to take everything he has as he will contact Moria to mortgage the remaining land. Cheryl stands next to her brother, a disgruntled expression on her face. A couple of days later, guards stand guard at the gate and ask them to pass. A carriage with horses drives inside. An important man steps out of the luxurious carriage. Grim, pipe in hand, asks if it will truly be his. 3 important men stand back to back and it is explained that he is a former aristocrat and now the owner of the Moria Trade Association. A large castle stands in the forest, and it is explained that this family amassed a vast fortune through land projects and exchanges carried out over generations. However, a soldier kills a man with a spear. It is explained that about 30 years ago Aaron's father issued a ban on the sale of lands and those who resisted this law destroyed the duchy. Grim sits at a table facing a line of people. He didn't give up easily. To restore his family's power, he created an illegal lending business in the capital whose main clients were small businessmen. In a rage, he beats people, saying that where his money goes, there will be bloodshed. He increased his capital, even if it meant taking radical measures. Grim stands on a mountain of gold. Ultimately, the trading group is one of the 3 largest on the entire continent. The owner of the Moria Group asks with an air of importance if it's true that all this will soon be his. A man stands next to him and declares that a land sales ban prevents him from directly purchasing Brand's lands. But if the Duke becomes insolvent, they will take his lands as payment for the debt. The gay-haired man smirks, saying that the former emperor, his family's worst enemy, would strip his son of his last penny and send him to die in the streets. Perfect revenge. Grim closes his eyes and nods, saying, "It's time for revenge." With a sinister grin, he declares that he will show this idiot who doesn't understand the weight of money why they call him a bloody coin. They kneel before Aaron. Aaron joyfully spreads his hands, asking how their trip north went, if everything was all right. Grim smiles and says that as long as there are clients in the world willing to borrow his money, he'll travel to the ends of the earth. With a serious expression, he notes that this also applies to clients unwilling to repay their debts. A spark ignites between them. Aaron looks at him intently and realizes that his defeat is the most desirable thing for him. Grim, with a forced smile, thinks about Aaron's joy when he loses all his lands. The advisor sits next to them, assuming they know the reason the master has gathered them. Grim smiles and agrees with Kane, noting that the Duke wishes to borrow 3 million from the Moria Group for a casino bet. He hands over a signed paper and says it's a drawn-up contract. Aaron and Kane watch silently. Aaron takes the paper and declares that they've already taken care of everything, so he doesn't care. Grim, shocked, asks why they were called. Then Aaron, folding his arms, says he wants to borrow more money, about 2 million. The company owner, displeased, replies that if he plans to spend this money on mercenaries, he'll have to refuse this dubious pleasure. Merchants like him can't directly influence the nobles' wars, otherwise they'll lose other clients. Aaron, closing his eyes, assures him that he has no intention of hiring mercenaries. Only his army will be at war. Grim, sitting across from him, asks what he needs the money for. Then the guy looks away and explains that it's nothing special, just an investment. After winning the war, he'll still get much more money. So, he wants to spend the funds on developing the lands in advance. Grim, thinking, realizes that even if Aaron loses, the lands will be his and he won't lose anything. He looks at the cheerful guy and wonders why this idiot won't admit he's losing. What's going on in his mind? Grim, with a disgruntled expression, agrees, saying that if he signs the clause in the contract about investing in his lands, he'll give him the money. Aaron, overjoyed, declares that he'll sign everything right now. The old man, enraged, slams the table and shouts that this is unacceptable. The Duke and the businessman look at him in surprise. Kane angrily declares that if they lose the war, they'll have nothing left. He can't allow this contract, either as treasurer nor as head of the billers. Aaron anxiously asks him to wait because they absolutely must win. Grim watches the two arguing and realizes there's no better time to bury them in debt, so he needs to come up with something. His eyes widen in surprise as an idea strikes. He raises a finger and announces an interest-free loan. Aaron and his assistant turn around in shock and ask again. The businessman, smiling, declares he's willing to take the loan interest-free. At least it will save them the trouble, but he'll keep it to himself, not telling anyone he also bet on their victory. The guys, dumbfounded, listen silently. Grim walks to the carriage, and his assistant asks if he really bet on the Duke. The assistant, turning around, asks if Grim is crazy since it was simply a lie to get them to trust him. The gray-haired man smiles slightly, claiming he has a remarkable mind, and he's also quick to use it. No wonder he's reached such heights. The businessman smiling says they probably consider him an ally. Together they share a laugh. The Duke stands next to Kane looking out the window. A surprise there and asks the old man how he did it, and he asks again what exactly. Aaron smiling declares that he put on a perfect show, a permanent interest-free loan. It couldn't have been better. The confused assistant replies that it's not a game but years of experience. Rama waving his hand orders the soldiers to fire. The events take place 20 days before the territorial war. The elves draw their bowstrings. Targets stand before them. The Duke, surprised, asks why things are so bad. A soldier with a sword gallops past them, saying that the enemy cavalry will destroy them before they can even fire. The enraged young man asks if the old man gave them food. Kane, furious, declares that of course he did. Kindness calmly remarks that they lack range. He points at the elves and claims that the maximum range of their bows is at least 100 m. While on the battlefield, the average distance to the enemy is about 200. The Duke, lost in thought, says that it's an open field and an ambush is impossible. If they do nothing, it will be disastrous. He solemnly declares that the entire empire will be watching the battle, so he won't be able to help with his own strength. The dragon stands nearby and declares that they definitely shouldn't participate, but that Cheryl must be prepared depending on the situation. Kindness calmly explains that such wars are battles of different variables. Soldiers with weapons stand opposite each other, saying that if they control these variables, they can ensure a fair fight 1,000 to 1,000. The Duke standing nearby asks how. The assistant with a serious expression replies that, for example, right now they're unsure whether their arrows will reach their target. That's an unacceptable variable. He plans to get rid of the distance variable. Holding a fan in front of him, he continues explaining. Aaron asks. Kindness calmly explains that to create new bows, they need special materials and an experienced blacksmith who can create the weapon in a short time. The Duke frowned and said there were less than 3 weeks left, asking where he could get everything he needed. An assistant in a white cloak asked for 3 days, and the boy would receive a blacksmith along with all the materials. A shocked Aaron asked if he could really handle it at that time. Kindness, with his fan, agreed, saying the blacksmith would be unusual, more accurately, not human. The Duke remained questioningly silent. The dragon, grinning, introduced the dwarf. The dragon raced through the sky. The monster's body turned over a high mountain. A few seconds later, the dragon landed in the northern lands of Bran in the dragon's nest. Several people approached the monster, saying they had been waiting for it for a long time. The man held out a diamond, saying it was what he asked for. Tapping it with his claw, the dragon asked the man why he was so bad. Raising his head in fear, the assistant begged for mercy. The dragon's claw confidently tossed the diamond aside. The stone immediately shattered, hitting the mountain. The dragon confidently declared that he would not tolerate this anymore. Looking at all the guys, the dragon confidently asked them to stop hiding and come out. Looking at the crowd, the monster ordered Keishi to come to him. The girl approached Kindness in fear. Looking at the girl, the dragon asked her to climb up as they had much to do. Keishi, her mouth wide open, did not understand what was happening. 10 minutes later, the dragon was flying quickly through the lands of Bran in the Minotaur labyrinth. A few seconds later, Kindness began to slowly land. His head was raised upward. As soon as Kindness lowered it, fire quickly erupted from his mouth. All the Minotaurs slowly died in the enormous flames, burning alive. As he rose into the sky, Kindness calmly replied that his material was ready. The man stood calmly in the city next to Keishi. The cart contained the Minotaur horn. Aaron looked at it all in surprise. Holding the horns in his hands, the boy asked Kindness where he got them. Shielding his face with a fan, the man replied that these were water buffalo horns necessary for upgrading weapons. This material doesn't tolerate water, but is excellent for long-range shooting. Aaron, looking at the horns in amazement, couldn't believe they could produce such things. Kindness, closing his eyes, replied that he bought them cheaply from some merchant who wanted to part with them. Looking at the material with interest, Aaron couldn't understand why everything was so simple. Looking up, Aaron saw Keishi sitting on a cart. Kindness looked at the girl, ordering her to get down and greet the Duke. A few seconds later, the girl quickly jumped from the cart to the ground. Her feet touched the asphalt. Keishi, crossing her arms over her chest, asked Aaron, displeased, if he was ready to serve her. Kindness and the others were speechless. The girl looked at the boy and asked him how he was speaking to Kindness. The man quickly ran up to Keishi and grabbed her with an air of displeasure. A few seconds later, Kindness ran off somewhere with the girl. A moment later, Kindness, smiling, held a battered Keishi by the shoulders, telling Eren that she wasn't human and didn't know manners. Lowering his head, Eren replied that he didn't care about etiquette and was more interested in possibilities. His body sank to Keishi's level. Ramo and Kindness looked at the Duke in surprise. Placing his hand over his heart, Eren replied that he was the Duke of Bran and was ready to serve the girl. Keishi looked at him in surprise. The girl, accompanied by her assistants, was giving them various instructions as there were 2 weeks left before the war began, and Keishi had everything she needed to produce new weapons. The girl carefully examined the weapon. Keishi, opening her mouth, began yelling at her assistants for doing something wrong. All the assistants looked at the girl with displeasure, as everyone was already fed up with Keishi's antics. A fight broke out as this whole situation led to conflict. Eren shouted angrily at everyone to stop. After a while, the battered Keishi and his assistant shook hands, allowing production to continue. Bows were slowly stacked on the table. After a while, a huge pile of bows lay on the table. Eren smiled and praised the boys. A tired Keishi and his assistant high-fived each other, realizing they had completed all their preparations 3 days before the war began. Standing in one of the territories, Kindness explained to everyone that the entire empire would be watching, and neither the Duke nor his sister would be able to use their powers, and even with such powerful weapons, they would not be able to defeat an army twice their size. Kindness thoughtfully raised his fist to his mouth. His foot hit the ground. Eren's body immediately somersaulted in the sky. Kindness thought about the dirt. Looking thoughtfully to the side, Eren pretended to remember something. The boy's body with a stream of power rose upward. Kindness was high in the sky. Looking away with joy, Eren thought about the dirt. Opening the door, Kindness told the girl to get up. Keishi sat tiredly by the bed. Slowly sliding down, the girl begged for mercy. The girl's head looked tiredly at the floor. Kindness began to approach her with displeasure. With a quick wave of his hand, a stream of water fell on the girl. Keishi looked tiredly at the master, begging her not to kill him and replying that she couldn't hear anything. Kindness, angrily shouting at the girl, told her that he wasn't going to kill her because she needed to go to the battlefield. The day before the war began, the army was already prepared for battle. The warriors stood at attention. Sitting at the table, Aman replied that he had to give up an extra 10% to ensure their victory. With a sly smile, one of the guys asked Aman how much he had bet. Showing 500,000. Eren replied that he would have bet more, but he didn't have enough money and didn't want to ask Moria. Laughing, the man said he was a very slippery fellow and that eventually merchants like him would be fighting at their feet as soon as the gold mine was theirs. Raising his mug, Aman said his friend was right. Lowering his head, the man wondered with interest where he was taking this fool. Aman looked away in confusion. An army marched confidently along the road with Eren. Looking at the scene, the guys, horrified, realized that a siege of the tower had occurred. An army stood near the building, laughing at everything that was happening. The guys thought about how desperate the Duke was, having brought all this junk. A horse ran along the road. A huge number of warriors looked at the horse. A messenger sitting on horseback loudly shouted that the emperor had ordered this to be finished quickly, so representatives of both sides should retreat. Aman and his friend raced on horseback. Eren, watching them closely, ordered his horse to run forward. Eren's horses were a few meters apart. Aman approached Eren, saying he looked really bad and deserved applause for bringing back junk. Smiling, Eren thanked them for the compliment, saying that even so, he looked better than their fat faces. Aman clenched his fists in anger. Reading the paper, the messenger began to explain that all the rules for both sides would be read once. If Duke Eren won, the lands of the 2 counts would become the property of the Duke, as would the gold mine, which lay between the warring parties' lands. If the counts won, the lands they owned would no longer be considered part of the duchy, and the gold mine would become the property of the victors. Closing the inventory, the man asked for any objections. Eren looked at the counts with a smile. Aman and his friend did the same. Clapping his hands, the man asked everyone to take their positions and begin the battle. The horses slowly dispersed. Eren turned his head, trying to say something. Aman looked at the Duke in confusion. Raising his hand, Eren asked the boys to protect their heads, touching the tops of their heads. The guys couldn't understand the meaning of this. The judge standing in the middle began to read something. A few seconds later, a bomb fell on the battlefield. Aman, watching this, said that the Duke had had enough. Approaching the warrior, Eren offered him 5,000 gold if he finished the battle before his tilt. With a smile, the knight replied that he would have time and there was no need to worry. Turning his head, the leader of the warriors ordered his men to throw away their shields so they could finish this quickly. All the shields were thrown to the ground. Running forward, Eren shouted. Sparing no one, the warriors rushed forward. Rommel, looking at the enemy, decided it was time for them to begin. Eren shouted for the archers to change weapons. Bows lay at the warriors' feet. The archers held them tightly in their hands. Within seconds, the men were already standing, aiming at the enemy. Rommel, his mouth wide open, ordered them to shoot. Arrows flew quickly from the bows. The warriors, their heads raised, looked up. A huge number of bows fell from the sky. Turning back, the warriors shouted to retreat as they had fallen into a trap. Arrows were aimed at the guys. Running forward, the leader shouted to duck and spread out. The warriors ran back. Rommel, raising his hand, shouted for the siege towers to prepare. The warriors stood confidently at the tower. One of the guys twirled the cannons. The horse ran forward. Eren looked ahead with interest. Kainis watched with pleasure. After a few seconds, an iron net began to fly from the cannons. The hooks grabbed the ground. The net created a shield, trapping the warriors. The enemies striking the shield tried to wield it with their swords, realizing it was futile. The leader, turning his head to the warriors, replied that they would handle everything. A stream of power coursed through the net. The man looked up in confusion. His gaze, unsure of what it was, wondered what it was. Archers, led by Rommel, stood near the tower, pointing at his head. Eren told the enemies that they had failed to protect it. Arrows flew forward in droves. The warriors sitting in the net shouted at each other to dodge. A few seconds later, blood began to spray in the sky. Amon and his friend watched angrily, realizing they had lost. Eren, angrily grabbing Amon, asked him why he had told them to drop their shields. The man, looking away fearfully, indicated that he had expected things to turn out quite differently. Raising his hand, the man signaled for reinforcements to come to the rescue. A new group of warriors rushed forward. Rommel, sitting on his horse, shouted to deal with the reinforcements before they returned. The horses raced forward. The man glared angrily at the enemy, asking his men to deal with them. Arrows flew forward. Rommel looked around with Bianca. The girl's warriors raced forward with her. Raising her shield, the girl gave power to protect her subjects. A bright light formed near the shield. All the warriors were protected. Only a bright magical shield appeared near the guys. The warriors quickly raced forward. Amon, looking on in fear, understood that this was impossible. Eren and Kainis's grin maliciously crossing their arms. The numbers of the Count Alliance armies and Eren's camp are shown. They clearly have an advantage over Eren. The commander points at the mass of soldiers. The Count, enraged, orders the infantry to take the right flank and attack the enemy cavalry. The army rushes to attack. Rommel, holding his sword, sees the approaching opponents. He turns and orders half of his ranks to follow him, while the rest finish off the enemy cavalry. Knights on horseback gallop forward. Their ranks split in two. A warrior, brandishing his blade, declares it necessary to attack. 200 cavalrymen attack 1,000 warriors. The warrior waves his sword in fury. The number of soldiers has decreased to 975. The cavalry cuts through the warriors. Their number has reached 923. The frightened warriors with spears look at the enemy. They see a ferocious commander with a sword before them and cry out for help. One of them tries to escape. Exhaling, he rises. He turns and sees the enemy approaching before him. Bianca, with a terrifying look, gallops straight at him. She knocks him down and the boy flies high into the air. The cavalrymen effectively defeat the enemy. The warrior on horseback turns back. The counts watch with excitement, their trembling palpable. One of them turns to the magicians and declares that they need to be stopped. The other asks the mercenaries to do at least something. The sorcerers bang their staffs, chanting in an incomprehensible language. Their staffs create a blue aura. They raise them above themselves, generating magical projectiles. Bright flashes of mana cut through the sky, rushing toward the enemy. Eren, standing next to his assistant, notices this in surprise. Energy projectiles fly in their direction. Confused, Rommel sees the flying magic. Several projectiles crash into the ground, causing explosions. The Duke fearfully shouts the name of his soldier. Fortunately for him, he has blocked himself with a barrier. Eren sighs with relief. The warrior looks up and sees the barrier cracking. He looks fearfully and realizes it was close. He sees a group of mages in front of him. He turns to his subordinates and orders the cavalry to forget about the infantry. As they are retreating, the man turns his horse. They stand before a huge army, shouting that they are not going anywhere. As they are finished, Rommel nervously turns his head. The counts watch him with smirks. The cavalry is completely surrounded. Eren watches the battle and says that Rommel is an excellent commander, but even for him, this is too much. The Duke, holding out his hand, orders the infantry to attack as they need to save the cavalry and the knight captain. The soldiers run forward. He turns to Kainis and declares that he will go save the commander, leaving the mages to him. Kainis, shocked, exclaims about the Emperor's spy. Eren waves him off and says that the warrior's life is more important now. So don't worry, he will somehow deal with the spy. Eren, looking serious, calls for Cheryl. Kainis watches him disappear into the forest. A dragon with a fan shouts to the archers to draw their catapults. The soldiers pull on the ropes. A catapult moves forward. Several dozen catapults stand on the field. Kainis waves his hand and gives the order to open fire on the enemy. Rocks fly towards the enemy, landing on the opposing army. Boulders continue to attack them, their numbers reduced to 190. The Count, enraged, orders the boulders to be detonated. Energy beams fly across the sky, crashing into the flying boulders. The Count, arms outstretched, excitedly asks where his tricks are now, as they certainly cannot compare to magic. He points in the opposite direction and asks the mages if they can detonate the catapults. The cloaked wizard replies that they need time for that. The Count, smirking, twiddles his fingers, saying they will play for high stakes. Kainis, hiding behind his fan, thinks they have twice the strength, but they still hired mages. Human greed surpasses even that of goblins. He surveys the battlefield and declares that the situation is far more complex than he expected. Perplexed at what the Duke is planning, Eren stands in front of his assistant, who looks at him. The dragon bows and greets his master. He sees a huge amount of mana in him. A disconcerted Kainis can't believe a human can emit so much mana. He stares ahead. Eren is reflected in his frightened eyes, wondering if it's an illusion. Eren is ablaze with blue flames and the dragon ponders whether this is Mistress Cheryl's illusory magic, and that it's not so easy to recognize at first glance. He sees a man running in the distance. Eren, dressed in simple clothes, holds a knife. The assistant with a serious expression says that this guy never ceases to amaze. Eren stands near the army thinking the spy is already far away, but it wouldn't hurt to be safe. He makes his way between the soldiers wondering where he is. He sees a helmet lying below. He puts it on his head and confidently declares that he's going to Rommel. He just needs to hold out a little longer. Kainis, with a stern expression, orders the catapults to be prepared. The soldiers hastily load them with stones. Suddenly, the catapult near the dragon crashes. He shields himself with a fan. He sees this in surprise and notices that they want to destroy the weapon. The warrior in white furiously gives the order to attack them from maximum range. Stones fly forward. He looks at them and thinks that this means he should protect his head. Closing his eyes, he urges them to fly. The stones bounce through the air, changing their trajectory. The mage, holding his staff, shocked, notices the magic of flight. The counts see boulders flying towards them. Frightened, they order the mages to stop them. They direct their staff, creating energy. Magic beams rush towards the projectiles. Kainis, his eyes glittering, casts protective magic. They crash into the stones. The boulder flies on without visible damage. A group of sorcerers see this, and shout that the stones are still falling, and they need to hide. The enemy mages are scattered by the powerful blows. The counts look on in shock and wonder what happened. One of the wounded raises his hand and speaks of the sky. They turn around in shock. Several rocks fly at them again, and they exclaim that they're returning and that Eren seems to have a mage too. Covering their faces with their hands, they feel explosions all around them. The Count, enraged, thinks the Duke has hidden his trump card. If it's come to this, they need to throw all their forces into the war. In anger, he orders the archers to stop exposing themselves and aiming at the battlefield, fighting hand to hand. The army rushes forward. The blond man points an enraged finger and orders the mages to destroy the catapults protecting the main camp. The terrified sorcerer declares they can't as it will take time to disable their weapons. The scoundrel, looking mad, shouts that they apparently don't want the reward as they need to stop chatting and do something. The wizard, excitedly understands him. He turns to his comrades and says they need to aim at the boulders and defend the camp. The warriors raise their staves to the sky. Drops of water form. Boulders approach them. They fly into the water. They hold stones in the air using telekinesis. They hurl them further. Explosions occur. Kainis looks on in surprise and says they're using useless tricks. With a smirk, he wonders if they can handle this. He turns to the archers and orders them to set their arrows on fire and shoot as far as possible. The elves knock their fiery arrows. The dragon, with a stern expression, orders the attack. Hundreds of flaming arrows fly across the sky. With the help of magic, they change their trajectory again. The terrified counts see this, shouting that they are also fiery. The mages raising their staves use the water ball again. Drops of water slam into the arrows. The counts watch in surprise. The cloaked sorcerer looks questioningly. Kainis, his eye blazing, uses gravity's shift. The flaming arrows change their trajectory again. The disconcerted wizards see the projectiles approaching. They set them on fire, and in the flames they cry for help. The count stands before the fire. Their wizards have been completely routed. Eren, wearing a helmet, smiles and says they claimed their mages were the most powerful, but now they're completely defeated. Clutching his helmet, he wonders if he should go and kill a few enemies. Suddenly, a bright light appears around him. Romel's army stands surrounded, swords drawn. Gritting his teeth, he says reinforcements are approaching. He turns and searches for his own. He looks ahead in surprise. A spearhead flies at him. Shocked, he sees it with his own eyes. He manages to dodge, but the enemy lightly slashes his face. The commander, sternly considering how he must hold them off until reinforcements arrive, delivers a powerful blow to the enemy, slicing through everyone who approaches. Enemy soldiers fall to the ground. Rommel frantically grips his bloody sword. Furious, he shouts that help is on the way. They must fight to the death. The knights raise their swords at this. The commander stands confidently in a fighting stance, his armored comrades behind him. The terrified opponents see them. Bianca stands surrounded by her soldiers. Surprised, she looks away. She sees the massed troops and realizes the cavalry captain is in danger. She begins to gallop, shouting that the cavalry detachment will deal with the opposing cavalry and that the crusaders should follow. Her squad rushes to the rescue. A diagram of the battle is shown. The numbers of the armies indicate that the counts still have the advantage. A terrified soldier turns around. He sees Bianca and her squad shouting that the enemy is advancing. The girl smashes them to pieces, their armor flying in all directions. The blonde confidently declares that they must be defeated and then rescue the knight captain. She shields herself with her shield, seeing the enemy soldiers. One of them is thrown back by a counterattack. Bianca skillfully scatters her enemies. The count's infantry captain desperately shouts that the enemy must not be allowed to break through. The warriors holding spears stand in line and are ordered to cover the rear. Bianca, riding a horse, watches this. She sees a huge enemy army before her. She covers herself with a white shield, feeling dozens of blows. She peers out from behind it and thinks that they reacted too quickly. She gallops on horseback and calls out to the goddess Vivin. Her shield begins to glow brightly and she prays. Closing her eyes, she calls for the goddess's blessing. A bright light is felt around her. The soldiers clutch their eyes, screaming in pain. Bianca, looking confident, orders the attack. Eren, camouflaged, makes his way through the enemy army. He looks ahead and hears a cry that he will kill anyone who retreats. She watches carefully and realizes she has found the captain. A white handkerchief is tied around his hand. A man with a sword orders the army to move forward. He screams with a serious expression that their enemies are vile rats. Suddenly, he receives a dagger in the back. He turns around in fear. He sees the ferocious Duke before him. He falls to the ground. Eren wipes his knife and declares that he is a rat who has come to kill him. The enemy commander falls dead. Eren looks back and thinks about saving Rommel. An army with spears advances. A bald man is visible in the midst. Eren rushes forward, realizing that he must deprive them of their leader. He deftly advances through the crowd of soldiers. He plunges his blade into the commander of the Count's infantry. The other falls with blood in his mouth. Two commanders suddenly fall among the army. Eren watches silently. Suddenly, he begins shouting that the commander is dead and all units must retreat. The frightened soldiers argue among themselves about whether the commander is really dead and who is giving the orders. Then one of the warriors loudly shouts that all units of the Count must listen. A white bandage is on his shoulder. Eren frowns as he sees it. The leader of the archer squadron confidently urges them not to let their enemies confuse them. He points to the opponents and declares that there is nowhere to retreat. They must attack. 1,000-strong army surrounds the cavalry led by Rommel. Warriors with spears pierce the armored knights. The Duke's commander watches sadly. He begins to scream in rage. Eren watches this with excitement. The archer commander desperately puts out his hand. Eren watches, gritting his teeth. Holding a knife in his hand, he realizes he needs to do it again. Suddenly, he begins to run. He sees the enemy's back and realizes it is the last commander. He aims for his back, swinging his knife. Suddenly, several swords block the path of his blade. He is disconcerted by the sight of the soldier. The soldier turns with a smirk, asking if the boy really thinks he didn't foresee this. Eren smiles. The enemy looks at him questioningly. The Duke wonders if his prediction was true. He is a blade. The soldiers cross their swords. Eren furiously slashes at his opponents. The terrified commander sees this. Horrified, he begins to give orders. His eyes fill with blood, exclaiming that they must be killed. Eren cuts him off before he can finish. Eren turns and calls for Rommel. The commander sits on the ground, spears flying in his direction. His gaze is devastated. Suddenly, someone attacks his enemies, sending them flying. Bianca and her soldiers confidently defend their comrade. Arthur, on horseback, exclaims that the enemy has lost their command and that this is an excellent opportunity. The Count's army, shocked, mutters among themselves that reinforcements have arrived and the infantry is trapped. Everything around is ablaze and words of retreat are heard. Aaron, grinning, clutches his helmet, realizing he has done everything possible. A bright light appears around him. Boulders fly down. An explosion occurs. The letter speaks of Duke Aaron versus the Counts, stating that the Duke's army was initially outnumbered by half, but Aaron prevailed. The Count stands surrounded by Aaron's army. He confidently advances, smirking as he declares their faces a joy to behold. The terrified Counts tremble with fear. Aaron taps his head and declares that he warned him to protect it. The frightened enemy wonders how he can walk under arrows. He begins to draw his sword, asking what kind of magic he's using. Several blades instantly appear at his face. He freezes in horror. Aaron holds his weapon in front of him and asks how he dares to defame his honorable victory. Being a minor vassal at that, the young man swings his weapon, shouting that today he will kill him and bring order to these lands. Suddenly, one of the aides asks him to stop, asking what good would come from killing the viceroy. Aaron, furious, demands he let him go, asking if he doesn't know that insulting a member of the ruling family is insulting the emperor himself. The terrified opponent kneels and insists he was wrong. Begging for his life, Aaron turns to the other count and asks what to do with him. He kneels and declares defeat. Aaron calmly says that if they so desire, their cities will henceforth be part of the duchy. The rivals lower their heads, declaring that everything is his will. Aaron sternly shouts that the annexation will begin that evening. If he sees even the slightest hint that they are using the citizens for their own gain, they will lose their titles. One of them is crying. The other is simply shocked. Aaron sits at the table with his advisors. The action takes place the next day at noon. Cain, smiling, points at the paper and says it's a wagering receipt from the betting castle. Closing his eyes, he says it lists 3 million and another one for a debt of 2 million since the dividend rate has increased about tenfold. The old man smiles with great joy. He throws the papers up and shouts that they will earn almost 50 million gold from this war. The Duke sees him and asks the elder to stop as this money will be invested. The old man, looking crazed, asks again, clarifying whether he understood correctly. Aaron grabs his head and says that money is money, but they will start with the fact that the goal of the war was to attract labor. The guy holds up 2 fingers and claims that after the campaign both territories received a city for a total of 4 grand. If you add the one they received for clearing the Black Forest of Orcs, Brand's territory has doubled. The ruler sits at the table and says that the money must be used to stabilize the increased territory. He plans to gradually expand it further. With a serious expression, he continues explaining. Aaron, with an important expression, claims that he will become a loser from the north. All the council members are shocked. Cheryl, frightened, asks her brother what he means. The Duke, sitting against the backdrop of the evil emperor, declares that after the war, the Lord will watch their every move, as will all the feudal lords who obey him. Aaron, looking serious, assures them that if they blindly hide their abilities, they will destroy them before they can grow stronger. Waving his arms, he asserts that he will be loyal to the emperor and will give him and his lackey what they want until they are ready. Aaron, smiling, declares that they will keep all the loot for themselves and force them to swallow bones. A young man bursts into the office and shouts that the owner of the Moria Merchant Guild has arrived. Aaron, smiling, says that he has already arrived. Sitting across from the council, he exclaims that in that case they will end the meeting and everyone except the elder should return to their duties. Grim furiously shows the paper and shouts that it is evidence. He points his finger and tells the Duke that if the war is won, he must pay 5 million gold. Aaron looks on with displeasure. He turns to the old man sitting next to him and asks if they have the funds for this. Cain calmly replies that they don't even have enough for food and living. Grim angrily points to the paper and cites that the Duke is obligated to repay. The elder squints and asks to see. He points confidently and says, "It's here." The company owner turns the paper over and asks where it is. Cain, sitting across from him, cites that the payment will be interest-free for an indefinite period. Grim opens his eyes in horror. The elder, pounding the table, asks, "How dare he? Because if it's written that way, he's deceiving his lordship." The assistant looks at the young man and asks if they shouldn't teach him a lesson on behalf of the empire, because how would they react in the capital? Aaron puts his sword to his throat and says he will kill him and that he will pay for his lie with his life. The businessman, horrified, sees the tip of the blade at his neck. With a serious expression, Aaron says he still has a chance to save himself. Grim, horrified, asks again. The boy swings his blade, confidently moving it forward. The company owner, fearful, covers himself with his hands and begs for mercy. He sees the sword stuck in the table. The Duke in the red cloak says he must swear an oath on this sword. The frightened man asks about the oath. The boy points his finger at him and shouts that he will become his vassal, devoting himself to the Bran lands. The swordsman stands against the sunset. The events took place several days later on the western continent. A bird lands on his hand. The long-haired boy reads the letter about Aaron's victory. Several soldiers with swords charge at him. He confidently swings the blade. He pierces their bodies at once. He draws the bloody sword. He sees 3 corpses before him. Crown Prince Philip looks ahead. He picks up the wooden handle. He places it on the stone floor. Standing over the gates in the middle of a castle filled with corpses, he declares that it's time to return to the Empire. With a smirk, he says that things are taking an interesting turn. Very interesting. The prince sits across from Zarin. The Emperor with a menacing expression says that he returned after learning that Aaron, the only distant member of the imperial family, had won and neglected his task of fighting for the western continent. He moves a chess piece. He knocks down the black pawn. It flies into the prince. The Emperor, looking angry, asks if Aaron really has such a strong influence on his son. Philip smiles sweetly. He holds onto the black pawn and asks what he means when he says it strongly influences. Suddenly, it begins to emit purple energy right in his hands. He crumbles the pieces onto the floor, smiling and declaring that he's only slightly interested. The prince, looking kindly, thinks about the throne he will one day ascend. The duke, sitting at his desk, works with papers. Kynus stands next to him, thinking about how Aaron has become a true expert, as nimble as a butler who has handled thousands of papers. Aaron recalls his past self and muses that he hasn't done this in a long time, but he was never so fast. The subject flies into the room and calls for his lord. The duke, enraged, shouts for him to knock. Rommel, frightened, announces that protests are raging in the lands of the Count Grey and Amon. Kynus and Aaron are surprised by this turn of events. Aaron thinks about them and says he doubts the citizens would do this voluntarily, so it's most likely the Count's doing. The guy smiles. Aaron with a sly look says he'll have to live up to their expectations. Bald Amon is having lunch, and someone calls him. Holding a fork of meat, he says that actually his master has deigned to dine. A guy with a letter runs in and shouts about declaring war. The Count jumps up from his chair asking what they're talking about. The Duke leads his army. Aaron sits surrounded by bewildered advisors who ask if he's really declaring war, and for what reason. Aaron with a serious expression replies about treason since Amon led the protest by disguising his soldiers as civilians. He also broke his oath and must give up his lands due to defeat. Rommel nervously declares that a battle for lands with a fixed number of men is something entirely different, and the Count's army is twice as large, so declaring war is pure madness. The Duke, crossing his arms, says that's true. Cheryl, surprised, asks why he's doing that. The boy, raising a finger, declares that the Emperor will think so too and that it will be absolutely true. Everyone around Aaron is extremely surprised. The girl, shocked, asks if he received the Emperor's permission for the annexation. Aaron with a sly smile says that the Emperor immediately granted it, thinking he was intoxicated by victory in a single battle. Everyone around the Duke is silent. Kynus looks at him and declares that he admires his master for thinking so far-sightedly. He will develop a strategy as quickly as possible. Aaron dismisses this, declaring that there's no need. The dragon with the fan, shocked, asks again. Aaron calmly asks that the strategist will have a lot of work ahead due to the recently annexed territories. Aaron, smiling, declares that since the war will be fought at night, and the Emperor won't be watching, he can handle it himself. So, let the assistant consider it an unscheduled vacation. The Duke's detachment gallops off in the middle of the night. Aaron on horseback asks if they'll leave. He begins to gallop quickly, ordering them to run forward. The Duke approaches Amon's castle. The scoundrel stands at the gates, thinking it's a siege, but there aren't any weapons, having gathered only his remaining soldiers. Amon smirks, thinking they won't be able to breach the walls because they have no siege weapons. If he holds out, his victory is only a matter of time. Aaron stands below and hears whether the Duke really declared war on the innocent Count because he's blinded by his greed. A cry rises across the night sky, declaring Amon a traitor and a criminal. Aaron in the red cloak says he has proof that he used his soldiers to organize a rebellion, but he can give the magnanimous woman a second chance as she opens the gates and surrenders. The Count nervously wonders how he learned of this, knowing he should keep his mouth shut because the war will end with his victory anyway. Balamon asks not to be ridiculous because if the boy is so confident, then let him try to cut through the gate. The Duke, smiling, hears that they will all pay for the master's arrogance. The boy turns and calls Cheryl. She begins to attack, asking why he is shouting when she is standing a step away from him. She forms a bright ball above herself. She sends several flaming projectiles into the attack. They approach the castle with a serious expression. She summons a rain of fire. Balls fly towards the gate. Suddenly, the barrier reflects her blows. Amon, arms outstretched, laughs, asking if the opponent really thinks he can break through the shield created by the sorceress from the ivory tower. Cheryl, furious, hears this and considers him a bald devil. She waves her staff. She strikes the ground with all her might. Water tentacles move towards the castle. They crash into the energy barrier. Waves roll along the wall. Only droplets remain. Aman looks down. The Count bursts into laughter, asking what kind of magic this is. Cheryl, with a stern face, calls for mudworms. Suddenly worms burst from the ground. Aman, shocked, sees them before him. They attack the castle gates. The Count in fear screams that the walls are collapsing and that he needs to run downstairs immediately. He sees the floor cracking beneath him. He jumps to the other side. He sits opposite the collapsed wall and asks what is happening. The Duke raises his sword and a cry is heard that the wall has fallen. Eren decisively points the blade forward and orders the attack and capture Count Aman. The cavalry runs toward the ruined castle. Aman, standing on the wall, orders fire and not let them come any closer. The archers take aim at the enemies. Arrows pierce their bodies. The Count in rage screams that they must attack. Veins are visible on his forehead. Rommel gallops forward and sees that arrows are hitting his soldiers. He catches one of the wounded. He shouts in rage that there are only a few enemies left, so they need to move forward. The army with spears charges. The soldiers on the wall continue to fire their bows on the Count's orders. Aman looks away in shock, his face full of anger. He kicks a soldier, shouting that he ordered him to shoot. The man falls and clutches his stomach. The comrades surrounding him look at his trembling body. Aman angrily exclaims that if they hesitate like this bastard, he will crush them with his own hands. The warriors listen silently. The Duke stands in front of the castle and says that soon these soldiers will become his subjects. Holding his sword, he declares that he cannot allow the Count to do whatever he wants. Cheryl, standing behind him, takes his hand with an air of importance and asks him if he remembers that the girl only promised a rain of fire. But now the guy owes him 100,000 for a mudworm. A surprised Eren objects that she did it of her own free will because she was angry. A projectile flies towards them. Eren turns around, sensing this. He catches the arrow with one hand. He sees a group of archers in front of him. He looks up and says they're pushing their luck. Eren looks at his sister and agrees with a 100,000. Suddenly, the Duke begins to disappear. In an instant, he runs and goes on the attack. Aman, standing on the wall, declares that they will win if the soldiers hit the bastard. Arrows fly at the Duke, who is running below. He definitely dodges each one. Eren, with a serious expression, understands that to minimize losses on both sides, he must quickly capture the bastard and end the battle. He breaks away, leaps onto the wall, swinging his sword. Aman screams in horror that it's impossible. The boy strikes with a powerful blow with the blade. His eyes flash red. The Count and his soldiers see him in shock. The guards quickly run away. The bald ruler called to them. They run towards the boy. Run past him. Fall to the ground. The Count turns and retreats. A frightened Aman orders everyone to disperse. He punches one of them in the stomach. Another falls from the wall. The Duke is furious, realizing that he can't even protect them. Running away as if their lives mean nothing. Eren jumps forward. Aman has climbed the stairs and shouts at them to attack. The terrified Count thinks that if only he knew he was so strong. His eyes widened in fear. He sees Eren running towards him. Eren frowns and addresses him. He points his sword and calls for surrender. Then his family and soldiers will remain alive. Behind the villain stands his army. A frightened Aman asks what about him. Eren calmly replies that he will die. The Count is frightened and silent. He crashes back into his soldier. His army stands silently before him. The ruler raised his sword and ordered an attack. A spear flies forward. It pierces his hand. Aman falls to the ground, bleeding. His soldiers stand before him, calling for surrender. The Count, lying on the ground, insults them. Eren stands at the bottom of the stairs and hears him beg for mercy. The frightened bald man swears allegiance to him and promises to become a devoted vassal. Eren cuts his head off before he can finish speaking. His hands fall to his knees. The Duke standing opposite asserts that he has no need of a vassal, that he is deaf to his subordinates. Eren raises his sword, shouting that the Count is dead and that they have won. An inscription from Aman is revealed. Mudworms burst from the ground. Amid the smoke, a proclamation states that Eren has won. Eren sits across from Grey. He is told that he claimed all of the Count's holdings except a small fortress as part of Bran. To save his life, the other Count heard of this and surrendered, agreeing to give up half his holdings. A map of the territories is shown, explaining that Eren has restored the Duchy of Bran and has begun making plans to seize nearby territories to increase his power, thereby becoming the underdog of the north. The map depicts castles in an imperial palace, indicating a battle with the emperor is imminent. The overlord, furious, clutches a letter, asking if Eren has truly won again. An aide, sitting nearby, declares that it is indeed so. The king, enraged, asks if he hadn't been the one who insisted the lad didn't have enough troops for 2 victories. The gray-haired aide, closing his eyes, assures him that this time the duke won again thanks to a mysterious sorceress. The advisor, sitting next to the ruler, declares that the rebellion of one duchy is not enough to create an empire. With a serious expression, he asserts that in any case, the problem is not influence, but the duke's intentions. The king, perplexed, asks again. The aide, with a solemn air, says he means they don't know what his goals are. The restoration of the Brand Duchy is inevitable. With a serious expression, he introduces Eren and says the question is whether he will submit to the empire or rebel. The king calmly states that Eren swore to focus on himself and remain in the duchy. If he breaks his word, the empire will never leave him alone. The aide looks at him and wonders what will happen if Eren restores the duchy. The empire will have no reason to hinder him. The king is stunned into silence. 2 warriors clash with swords, and it is explained that the imperial decree is based on the law of free warfare among vassals and is still in effect. Eren stands in front of the crowd explaining that the law was passed when he saw the throne and needed the support of the nobility. The king lowers his head and thinks. He looks away, hearing permission. Philip sits smiling nearby. He assures them he'll go and find out Eren's intentions, and at the same time take stock of the situation in Bran. The ruler, looking serious, continues to think. He bites his nails and orders them to visit the duchy, using congratulations on the victory as an excuse. The prince bows to him, saying he'll begin preparations immediately. He imagines their training and realizes he can't wait to see how the boy has grown. A crowd stands in front of a notice board where a letter hangs. Surprised, they read that the tax rate has been reduced to 13%. Meaning the rumors that the victory brought in a fortune are true. The duke stands nearby and they hear his name being chanted. Eren, smiling, notes that this is a delight to his ears and needs to sort things out quickly. Kynes, standing behind him, says that the duke's policy of increasing legitimacy is working. The boy shrugs and declares that this is the best method for stabilizing such a large territory, although he will be concerned about the future of the treasury of these lands. Eren asks with a serious expression how the dungeon development project is progressing and whether the second one will be opening soon. Kynes thinks about Elena and says she's behaving well. The abandoned tower has been reconstructed and the Dark Knights have been stationed on the upper floors. The Duke thoughtfully notes that she's fine. The enthusiastic young man asks how he knew she was a demon. Kynes, holding a fan, says there shouldn't be anything he doesn't know about this project, and besides, he has someone capable of dealing with the Dark Knights. Cheryl approaches them and calls out to Eren. The tired girl tries to catch her breath. She fearfully cries out that the prince and his delegation are coming to congratulate him. Eren ponders whether Philip was only strong enough to shock her with the news of his arrival. Perhaps the Duke knew him, but he's hearing him for the first time. The teenager stands before the fallen boy, and she exclaims that it's the same one who struck him down. Eren, placing his hand on his chin, declares that in that case, it's the Crown Prince. The surprised girl agrees, clarifying that he hates being called that. An aide standing nearby declares that it's obvious the prince, as a delegate, will congratulate him, perhaps wanting to keep him in line. Eren considers that if he screws up, he'll be swallowed up before he gains power. He looks around, wondering if there's a way to make the prince see them as dust so he can leave faster. Surprised, he sees workers pushing a cart in front of him. Eren stands opposite them and laughs. The prince and his delegation rode off on horseback 2 days later. He sees the castle and says the walls are quite high. One of the soldiers says rumors say the Bran lands have long endured monster raids, so defense is their best strategy. Philip smiles and asks if he's trying to spend his money wisely. Despite having won it in such a gamble, he seems to be behaving like a true ruler. A warrior waves a red flag standing in front of the gate. A banner is visible on the flag, shouting that the Crown Prince, the pride of the Empire, has arrived before the lord of the castle. The gates open. The Duke and his sister shout that they are honored that the prince has come all this way. He raises his head questioningly. Philip stands before him. They exchange displeased glances. Eren frowns, realizing he didn't even hear him dismount, completely unpredictable, so much so that he can't even blame him for it. The Crown Prince watches silently, noticing the boy's same intent gaze. He extends his hand, saying they haven't seen each other in a while. Eren, lowering his head, exclaims that it is indeed so, asking how the Crown Prince is doing. Philip smiles, noticing that Cheryl has grown into a beauty. The red-haired girl replies that she is already tired of hearing it. Eren, furious, asks how she behaves around the heir to the throne. The prince smiling suggests they skip the formalities just like in the good old days. The duke bows his head. While he's kneeling, a cry is heard, begging for mercy. The prince turns his head and looks at the wall. A man is yelling at another man, declaring that he needs to move if he wants to stay alive. He kicks the poor man in the stomach. He falls from the wall. Workers are carrying building materials. Ramo angrily orders them to get to work as the sun is still high. He will punish all who are lazy. The duke standing below asks what the commander is doing on the blessed day of the prince's visit. The man furious shouts at his lord. He descends. He falls to his knees declaring that he has committed a grave sin. The duke kicks him in the stomach asking how he dared approach. He kicks him shouting that he came right in front of the crown prince, and not to spoil the mood. Aaron, furious, wishes him dead. Someone places a hand on his shoulder. He waves it off asking what it is. Cecilia stands before him. The girl furiously asks what he's doing with an apostle on his sacred mission. The duke falls to his knees, crying out for a saint. Philip stands nearby and notices that these are the uniforms of the Vivian Church's novices. The prince smiles, wondering if Aaron has fallen victim to the cult's influence. An armored soldier whispers that this is a saint from the Vivian order. Philip calmly replies that he knows, asking why he's being humiliated. The assistant quietly explains that citizens of the empire were killed in a religious war with the Holy Order. A purple flash erupts. Those people were destroyed neither by their faith nor by their opposition to the empire. They died because they were heretics. The prince with a serious expression thinks that religion alone has had a negative impact on the empire. They dug their own graves. The duke joyfully runs toward him. Philip wonders if this is the reason why idiots are dying like flies. Aaron scratches his head and says that townspeople usually behave differently than they do on the day of the crown prince's arrival. He bows his head, apologizing for having to witness such a disgusting scene. The prince, smiling, places his hand on his shoulder and declares that it's no big deal, as such things are not uncommon when ruling a country alone, asking if he can go inside the castle and discuss adventures. Aaron, smiling nervously, begins to explain. The prince looks at him questioningly. Aaron turns and says it's his duty to accompany him, but now is prayer time. Philip asks displeased. The duke, smiling, says that as a lord, he is obligated to pray for his lands, and the current situation demands that he manage his time wisely. The young man clings to his sister and shouts that Cheryl will see him out. The young man approaches the prince and declares that they need to hurry and serve the prince. Aaron hurries away, declaring that he will be back very soon. The crown prince, perplexed, tries to understand what is happening. The night sky is visible above the castle. The prince sits at a table laden with food surrounded by servants and Cheryl. One of them knocks on the table and asks when the duke will return as they've been expecting him for an hour. The red-haired sister silently sips tea and places the cup on the table. He stands up and shouts, "Why the hell is he asking that? If he leaves, he won't appear again, and that's enough talking about it." Their gazes are filled with hatred. The prince sitting nearby offers him a choice. The astonished man asks again. Philip calmly asserts that he has the choice to apologize or die since he insulted the crown. The aide looks at him in horror. He falls to his knees and apologizes, shouting that if she orders him to, he will give his life. Cheryl stands silently opposite. He waves her hand and says that he needs to go and check if he's still praying. The servant beats his chest and exclaims that he understands her. The girl turns to the crown prince. Crossing her arms, she asks if this really amuses him. He really hasn't changed, clarifying what he meant by insulting the crown. Philip looks at her and says that she hasn't changed either. Her reactions are the same. A man across the room asks Cheryl to look at this. The girl looks out the window asking what happened. A crowd has gathered below. The surprised girl says that the prayer seems to have ended. The man points his finger and asks for a closer look. Cheryl looks down, amazed. Her eyes widened in surprise. Below, people with pitchforks are burning something. One of them, holding a torch, shouts that the lord, who joined the cult and is terrorizing the villagers, must leave. The pitchforks rise to the sky, demanding that he leave. The duke runs into the room. He falls to his knees and apologizes for being late, shouting that from now on he will take proper care of him. Philip, perplexed, asks if everything is all right, as it was a bit noisy. Aaron, surprised, asks again. He looks at his sister and asks what happened. The red-haired girl calmly replies that it's nothing special, just the crowd again. Philip, shocked, notices the words about it happening again. The duke, picking his nose, says that those bugs are here again. Aaron plays dumb, suggesting they just kill them. Standing opposite his sister, he says that as usual, they should dig a couple of graves, although it would be better to simply burn the bodies. His sister turns around saying she understands. She looks at him and turns to her brother with a smirk. She asks if she can kill one. The Duke with a sly smile declares that she shouldn't be so banal. The prince meanwhile listens to their conversation. Philip, with a serious expression, thinks that he's not just a tyrant, but rather a real pervert. Nervously, he reflects on how he's been through 2 brutal battles for land and yet worships the cult that carried out the massacre. He sees the Duke in front of him and thinks he's turned into a crazed maniac. They stand in the middle of the room and a cry is heard that the rebels must be killed. An aide approaches the prince and addresses him. In a quiet whisper, he tells him that Eren will indeed destroy all the inhabitants. The crown prince sits silently in a chair. He abruptly stands up and announces that he's returning. The Duke, shocked, asks if it's true, having only just arrived, asking if he liked the food. Philip passes by and says he had a wonderful time, but he sees that Eren is busy and doesn't have a free minute to keep an eye on him, so he'll leave, but there's no need to see him out. Eren raises his hand, trying to say something. The Emperor's heir confidently walks away, hearing him call out to him. The prince smirks. He walks forward, wondering what threat to the Empire could possibly be if he's about to destroy himself. Eren watches them go silently. Eren smiles slightly, realizing it all worked. Several people are lying on the floor, blood spilling all around. Rommel approaches with his sword. Eren appears behind him. He sits down next to the prostrate man and whispers that the corrupt lord has arrived. Arthur, grimacing, rises and begins waving his blade, shouting for the corrupt lord to get lost. The Duke punches him in the forehead, telling him to calm down. Eren and Rommel stand opposite him. Eren, smiling, holds a sack, declaring that the show is over. 2 days later, the crown prince sits opposite the king. The ruler, frowning, inquires about Eren's intentions. Philip, smiling, replies that there's nothing to find out. He only saw Eren seeking his own destruction. Eren, displeased, asks again. The prince looks at his father and explains that he is part of the unholy cult of Vivian and exploits the inhabitants, even slaughtering an entire crowd of protesters without hesitation. Eren smiles with Cheryl, saying the bigger problem is that he was enjoying himself, and not just him, but his sister as well. The ruler smirks and says that the death of innocent people in the Empire is a misfortune, asking if reckless actions aren't to his advantage. The prince asks with a serious expression. Eren, with a menacing expression, declares that he's come up with a brilliant plan. Eren, sword in hand, stands in front of a training dummy. He remembers Philip and realizes he didn't show it, but there's power behind his smile. The sword glows in his hand and he thinks how terrifying it is. He wonders what level he's reached. Eren swings his blade, exclaiming that he must first focus on the sword's energy. He strikes the dummy with all his might. The blade slams into it. Eren trains, thinking about what if he adds the dragon's blessing to this. A turquoise flash fills the dummy. A powerful beam tears apart several bags at once. Eren stands before the black mark, questioning whether this is truly not enough. He looks at his flaming hand and realizes it is the dragon's blessing, something he cannot control. In his other hand, he holds a sword, contemplating the power he wields. He looks away, contemplating the overthrow of the Emperor. Eren walks forward, saying he has much to do while concealing the development and growth of the territory. A week later, several squads of soldiers are visible in the middle of the castle. Arthur, in armor, stands among the elves. Rommel, surrounded by warriors, watches intently. Turning around, a stern expression appears. He orders them to form a turtle formation. The soldiers, armed with spears and shields, quickly dart from place to place. Covering themselves with their shields, they form a turtle. Arthur calmly orders them to fire. Dozens of arrows fly into the shields. Rommel peers out from behind them. Arthur, holding his sword again, orders them to aim. The elf draws her sword along with the others. They run to form a turtle formation. Rommel watches through a crack and says they need to wait a bit longer. The elves are rapidly approaching them. The commander, frowning, orders them to wait. Arthur runs with everyone else and shouts for a jump. The warriors leap up. They leap onto the turtle formation. Rommel, smirking, demands that their spears be unsheathed. The pointless practice spears rise up. The elves hit them directly and cry out in pain. They fall to the ground. Rommel watches him passively as Arthur attempts to attack him. He only receives a blow to the head with his shield. He flies back and falls. Horrified, he sees a practice spear covered in blood in front of him. The commander, smiling, extends his hand, asking if he really thought of jumping up. Eren approaches them and declares that they are doing well. He holds up the spear and asks whose idea it was. Rommel looks at the Duke and says it was Kainis' idea, saying that recruits should get used to the sight of blood before going into battle. Eren examines the spear and declares it truly useful. A subject hurries toward them, shouting urgent news for his lord. The tired man kneels and declares that the holy state of Paris has declared mobilization. Eren, looking at him, remarks that he will miss them if they decide to start a war with the Empire. The frightened man shouts that they are moving toward their lands. Rommel and Eren are shocked. Max, sitting at the table, assures them that they have 10,000 warriors while the enemy has 20 plus the Knights of the Church, which is an impressive force. Eren sits nearby and asks why they declared war and invasion and why the Empire isn't intervening. The advisor shouts that the Holy State wants to eliminate heresy, while the Empire remains on the sidelines because it has diplomatic ties with Paris. Cecilia sits silently. Kindness, hiding behind his fan, says that the Holy State could have agreed to this with the Empire's help. The Duke asks again, surprised. His assistant calmly declares the timing too perfect. The Crown Prince was here just recently. Eren clutches his face and says it's his fault. He wanted to deceive Philip, but didn't even consider the consequences. All the advisors at his table are silent. Cecilia trembles. She stands up, declaring that they will leave as there's no need for the Lord to endanger himself trying to protect them. A surprised Eren asks again, wondering if he should send them away. The Duke shakes his head, realizing it's a bad idea. A large part of their income comes from selling holy water from the church, and besides, he'll need the Crusaders' strength. Eren calmly addresses her. The girl looks at him in surprise. Eren, smiling, declares it was his mistake, so there's no need to blame yourself or talk about leaving. An embarrassed Cecilia exclaims. The Duke turns and leaves, calling for Kindness to follow him. He runs, shouting that they need to find out the Empire's position in this war. Eren sits at the table across from his assistant. With a serious expression, he says they're getting started. The advisor uses a fan to cast magic. A beam of energy shoots from the castle tower. It pierces space and flies into another tower. The lamp begins to emit a bright light. Eren screams, "How dare the Crown Prince do such a thing? How could he accept a declaration of war by a sacred state?" Given that the Duchy of Bran is an integral part of the country, Philip, standing in front of a similar lamp, insists that His Majesty the Emperor and he were against it. But it is the will of the feudal lords since everyone is going over to the Church of Paris. Eren begs for support from soldiers because if not, they will die. The Crown Prince listens silently. Eren desperately asks if they aren't of the same royal blood and that he can help in memory of the old days. Philip angrily asks what he means by death, saying that if they don't want to die, then they should renounce the church. Suddenly, the lamp goes out. The prince clutches his face, ashamed of ever considering this worm's arrival. Eren sits silently, palms folded. He turns and tells his assistant that things are something like this. Kindness, with a serious expression, says he understands the Empire's position. They claim they have nothing to do with this. Eren, head down, suggests that the Empire's plan is to use the Holy Land to eliminate him. Eren, with a crazed look, declares that they've messed with the wrong man. Fools don't even know he knows the Pope's Achilles heel. Kindness, standing opposite, asks again. Eren, smirking, asks not to worry as this is his ace in the hole for emergencies, so there's no need to worry. Eren looks at the assistant and asks if he can hire an artist for him. He needs to answer the call. A luxurious castle stands in the holy state of Paris, the capital of Regal. A warrior holds a piece of paper. He sees a drawing of Eren sticking out his tongue against the backdrop of a cross pierced by a sword. Archbishop Abel, grimacing, considers him simply insane, for how dare he use a declaration of war for provocation. Another priest stands across from him and suggests that the young man has lost his mind after falling under the influence of heretics, and is incapable of making proper decisions. Abel angrily shouts that even without the Empire's request, this territory must be cleared. They are simply mad, and this cannot be delayed any longer. His Holiness must be reported immediately in order to continue his advance through the territory. Pope Ignace of the Holy State stands before the warriors stating that he has immediately ordered the orders to set out and cleanse the blasphemous Duchy of Bran. Opposite him stands an entire army of fighters including 500 knights of the Order of Crusader and about 2,000 from others, equivalent to a fifth of the entire military might of the Holy State. Kindness stands near the map about to explain their strategy. Standing among his advisors, he explains that the enemy's army consists of approximately 20,000 units, while theirs is around 10,000. Furthermore, this war will be defensive, not offensive. So, a capable army and sufficient supplies are their priority. He marks red marks on the map with his pen. A dense forest is shown, and the advisor says it's important to stop the enemy at the entrance. Right there, the Duke, lost in thought, asks if he could provide a more detailed plan for how they'll accomplish this. Kindness, waving his fan, speaks of chaos and fear using the divine magic bomb Vivian which destroyed the Paris during the Crusades. All the advisors are extremely surprised by this answer. Cheryl, sitting opposite, asks if this bomb is forbidden, asking if all production methods have been lost, and what should they do now. Her assistant calmly replies that this is precisely why he called Sister Cecilia. The shocked girl replies that this cannot be true. Turning away, she assures him that all the instructions have indeed been lost. Kynes sternly says he doesn't need it. He simply needs to demonstrate the divine power of the Vivian Church, asking if it will help. Cecilia, furious, declares she misunderstood. Sadly, she explains that the divine magic bomb can only neutralize the power of the Perez Church. It is not a weapon capable of harming people. Aaron looks at it, and ponders that if that's true, then it's not fatal to them. So, why would the strategist want to use it? Kynes, smiling, asks not to worry about it. He's about to do something that will make it deadly. The surprised saint remains questioningly silent. The dragon hands over a paper, saying that technically it wasn't him, but Miss Cheryl, the red-haired girl, reads it in amazement. She's shocked, and asks what it is. The elf is sitting on a branch. The action takes place 5 days later in the Black Forest. Suddenly, he notices something. A huge army is approaching the forest. He jumps down. He stands opposite the Duke, who says it's quite impressive. Covering such a distance takes about a week. The strategist standing nearby explains that they arrived a couple of days early, which means they lied and are very exhausted. Kynes, hiding behind his fan, declares that given how impatient the commander is, the boys will definitely not leave peacefully. The Duke smiles, saying that they are simply following orders. Aaron looks at the tent and calls out to his sister. She peers out from the tent looking tired. Aaron calmly asks if she hit it well. Cheryl waves her arms in rage and shouts that she suffered for so many days to do this. But instead of resting, he asked her to disguise everything and get back to work. The Archbishop stands before the horseman approaching him. The warrior on horseback declares that as Abel suspected, there were no ambushes. The man, with a sly smile, says that starting a battle against the great army of the Holy Kingdom is tantamount to suicide. It seems the Duke isn't a complete idiot. The commander raises his hand and shouts that they will clear these lands before sunset, and all units must begin the attack. The warriors raise their swords and spears to the sky. Aaron peers out from behind a tree and thinks that they are doing everything possible to be killed. Aaron, raising his hand, orders all units to take positions. The warriors with spears fall into line. Everyone in the camp disperses. A squad of horsemen advances through the forest. Abel gallops on horseback, thinking about how he will become famous after victory, become a cardinal, and then the Pope himself. The squad suddenly stops. Abel turns around in anger and declares that everyone needs to hold their formation. Suddenly, he sees bright beams of energy nearby. The frightened Archbishop tries to understand what it is. Powerful bursts of energy envelop the entire forest. The enemy commander sits on horseback and shouts that these are divine magic bombs. Aaron stands on a tree branch, declaring it simply a beautiful view. Cheryl, shocked, holds a leaf and screams about what it is. Kynes, standing opposite, explains that this is a method for producing magical minds. Unlike divine ones, they are deadly. The strategist calmly explains that first, when the divine power is released, their enemies will remember the nightmares of the religious war, and then they will add an explosive effect to the magical minds which did not exist before, and will lead the enemies into flames. Kynes shields himself with a fan and says that this is the entire strategy of chaos and fear. Fire engulfs the forest, and cries are heard that it's a divine bomb. The Archbishop stands before his soldiers engulfed in flames, shouting that these are those very bombs. A warrior steps forward, a purple circle encircling it. He stops in shock, seeing this all around him. A soldier of the Holy State stands terrified amidst the magic. A purple glow engulfs him. The Archbishop shields himself from such a powerful flash. Abel looks at his attribute in surprise and says it's strange. In shock, he thinks about how the Vivian Church's divine bombs neutralize power but don't kill. The bald commander, stupefied, ponders this new weapon, thinking they're trying to plunge them into chaos and kill them. Gritting his teeth, he calls Aaron a bastard. He raises his hand and orders them to hold formation and run forward. The Duke stands behind him in the tree, Abel in shock, Aaron shouting for the mud of the sacred state who serves the pseudo-god to listen to him. He turns around. The Duke calmly declares that today he will bring justice upon him in the name of the goddess. The Archbishop, enraged, screams at how the boy dares insult Lord Perez. He raises his scepter and summons the Great Lord. A bright light is aimed at Aaron, asking him to bless them with his iron hammer. A bright beam shoots near the Duke, leaving a smoking trail on the tree. Aaron looks at it questioningly. The bald enemy smirks. A huge yellow fist appears above Aaron. It heads towards him. Aaron flies off the branch. He lands below, watching as the fist splits the tree in half. The Duke looks at his enemy calmly. Abel only smiles in response. Aaron, with a serious expression, considers that he's laughing while his soldiers are dying. They'll see if that grin stays on his face. The Duke, furious, waves his hand and shouts that the Order of Knights must kill this cultist. Aaron warriors emerge from the forest, screaming for the cultist's death. Abel asks again that it wasn't him, but they, the heretics, who dared to call a follower of Lord Perez such a thing. The archbishop on horseback angrily declares that he will cleanse them. His assistant runs up to him and assures him that they must retreat. The scoundrel waves his scepter. Abel, furious, strikes his assistant, asking if they're right about leaving the idiots who slandered the Lord. An armored warrior stands opposite, mounted on horseback. He takes hold of the archbishop's scepter. The bald man is shocked. The aide opening his visor declares that if he orders the destruction of the enemy, he will lead the Crusader order and fight to the end. But if they lose, all the Perez participating in the campaign will be exterminated by the heretics. The soldier bows his head and begs him to give the order and leave. The commander scowling curses and shouts in rage. He turns and orders a retreat. They are using divine power, so they need to prepare a shield. The soldier blows his horn, announcing the retreat. The army flees. Rommel on horseback shouts for them to stop. The Duke blocks his path and asks him to stop. He slows down. The commander, surprised, asks if there was no order to attack. Aaron, closing his eyes, explains that he said it to make it easier to pursue the idiots. If they rush headlong after them, they might run into mines. The Duke, standing in front of the army, declares that from now on, he will pursue the enemy alone. The Order of Knights must circle the forest and block their escape. Aaron sees the warriors and mentally apologizes to Rommel as most of the mines have already exploded. He looks ahead and thinks there's something he didn't want to show the soldiers. Aaron abruptly starts running. He moves among the burning trees. He runs past burning bodies. A corpse lies on the ground. Aaron looks away and realizes that Kaina's strategy worked brilliantly. He cuts through the air with his sword. He sees the army ahead and considers whether he should add more power now. Aaron swings his energy sword, wishing for greater mental power. His blade glows green, invoking the dragon's blessing. He swings it in rage, shouting about a piercing wind. A powerful stream of energy flies straight at the enemies. The frightened soldier turns and sees this. He tries to shield himself with his hands. He dodges, but the wave cuts the others in two. The terrified warrior kneels, seeing this. The Duke approaches him from behind. He runs past and stops. The soldier, terrified, begins to pray. The Duke turns around with a grin, realizing it worked. Aaron smirks and declares that he can control the dragon's blessing with mental energy. He just needed a good fight. The Duke runs forward again. Fire and smoke all around him. This image is visible in the magic ball. Kainas watches him, saying that the guy has really grown. Aaron confidently moves forward.